case of Ronald Jansen. In 2007, a terrible tragedy occurred that still haunts the local community. Fortunately, the perpetrator was caught and is now serving time for his crime. However, the length of the sentence has sparked much debate and raised several questions. Annick van Uytsel, a kind and humble girl, enjoyed spending time with her friends. She excelled in school and had big dreams for her future. On the evening of Friday, April 27, 2007, Annick chose to celebrate the end of the school week with her friends. She attended a Catholic gathering held at a small house in the countryside. Unlike the usual parties that can involve alcohol, drugs, and unhealthy activities, this event focused on providing safe and spiritual education for young people. The attendees ranged in age from 6 years old to teenagers and even adults up to 35 years old, all gathered to sing, play games, chat, and share their thoughts. That night, the atmosphere was filled with joy, laughter, and friendly conversations. Annick, who had been dancing with her friends, forgot about everything else. The party continued until 4 a.m. Afterward, Annick chose to cycle home with her friends. At a crossroads in the woods, they parted ways. In the morning, Annick's parents grew worried when she did not return home or even call. They began searching for their daughter, who was not answering their phone calls. Annick's parents learned that she had left the party at 4 a.m. and had not been seen since. She had not contacted anyone, which was unusual for her. Her family and friends joined in the search for Annick. Desperate to find their daughter, her parents contacted the police. They quickly took over the case and began searching for her. An official investigation was launched to understand the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. The idea that Annick had run away was quickly dismissed. All of her belongings were still at home, and she had not mentioned any plans to leave her parents. Annick had no boyfriend or savings to go out with. She was not depressed, had no conflicts, and had no enemies, so there was no reason for her to end her life. The police questioned her parents, friends, and everyone who attended the Catholic gathering, but no one seemed suspicious, and no one witnessed anything unusual. The police mapped out the route Annick took home that night. They meticulously checked the road, the corners, and all the surveillance camera footage from cameras along her usual route. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in the woods where she disappeared, leaving the investigation without any significant evidence. The police even explored other possible paths in the woods. There was speculation that Annick may have changed her route due to a fallen tree, or that she may have had an accident while cycling and was waiting for help. However, neither she nor her bike was found, as if they had disappeared completely. The police concluded that Annick was likely the victim of a crime, possibly a kidnapping, but no ransom demand was made, which was concerning. Despite this, people still hoped to find her alive, and the investigation remained active. The search was one of the largest in the country's history. In addition to the police, hundreds of volunteers were involved, including mounted officers, dogs, and helicopters. Police interviewed all local residents near the club and the area where Annick went missing, but no one had seen her. All efforts seemed to be in vain. Her parents distributed flyers with their daughter's photo and put up posters of Annick everywhere. They spoke to the media, begging for their daughter to come home and for any witnesses to come forward. The lack of leads made Annick's disappearance even more puzzling. Police found no signs of a struggle, no belongings belonging to Annick, and no other clues. They tried to track her missing cell phone, discovering that it had been turned on and off several times that night and the next morning, connecting to cell towers. Police and search teams scoured the areas where Annick's phone signal was detected but found nothing. On the evening of May 3, 2007, a passerby walking along the canal saw a large package floating in the water. Concerned, he called the police. At the time, the whole country was on high alert for Annick's disappearance, and the man feared that the package might contain her body. When divers arrived, they struggled to retrieve the package because it was unusually heavy. Upon examination, they discovered human remains inside, carefully packed with 2 bricks to weigh it down and prevent it from floating. The killer may have underestimated the strong currents of the canal and the effects of decomposition. Identifying the victim proved difficult due to the state of decomposition and water damage. A forensic expert was only able to confirm that the remains belonged to a girl. Police suspected that it could be Anik, who had recently gone missing, and her dental records eventually confirmed this. An autopsy revealed that Anik had died from blunt force trauma to the head, with a fractured skull and signs of assault. The news devastated Anik's family, who had hoped for her safe return. The brutal nature of the murder raised concerns in the community, highlighting that the perpetrator was dangerous and posed a threat to society. The investigation faced significant challenges. Although the area where the body was discovered was thoroughly searched, no evidence was found that could help solve the case. The only potential clue was Anik's missing bicycle, which may have had the attacker's fingerprints on it. More than a year later, on August 26, 2008, Anik's bicycle was found 50 kilometers away in Leuven. It was discovered in a suspicious location, suggesting that the perpetrator had deliberately hidden it. Additionally, the bicycle had been repainted. Unfortunately, the perpetrator had been very careful to remove any traces, and no fingerprints or other evidence were recovered from the bicycle. On January 3, 2010, almost 3 years after Anik's disappearance, emergency services responded to a report of a fire. Firefighters discovered an Opel Corsa burning on the road. When they arrived, they found 2 bodies inside the car. The car belonged to Kevin Paulus. Dental records identified the deceased as Shauna Appletans, 18, and Kevin Paulus, 22, the car's owners. However, autopsy results showed that their deaths were not caused by fire. Both had been shot before the car caught fire. Authorities believe the couple was murdered, and that the car was deliberately set on fire to destroy vital evidence. The shocking murder in this quiet community has had a profound effect on both locals and the police. Fear has spread throughout the area, with many people reluctant to leave their homes and their teenage children being prevented from going out. The public is calling on the police to quickly identify the perpetrator and restore safety to the community. When the police investigated Kevin's background, they discovered that he had a history of violence. Kevin was Shauna's boyfriend, and it is believed that he even knew Anik. The police found Anik's bicycle in Leuven, where Shauna lived. This suggested a potential connection between the 2 murders. As the investigation progressed, Kevin was named as a possible suspect. Police believe he may have killed Anik first, then his girlfriend Shauna, before setting fire to her bike to destroy the evidence and taking his own life. However, this theory requires further investigation to be proven. The police are focused on gathering evidence of his guilt, but their efforts are hampered by a lack of witnesses and direct evidence linking Kevin to the crimes. Soon after, a new suspect emerged, Ronald Jansen, Shauna and Kevin's strange neighbor, identified by other residents. People around said that Ronald often argued with Shauna and even fought with her. Kevin stood up for her. It seems that there was considerable tension between the neighbors, raising the question of whether this conflict could escalate into murder. Ronald is a teacher known to be responsible and serious, a model teacher respected by both his colleagues and students. At first glance, he seems unlikely to be involved in any criminal activity. However, he has been summoned for questioning in connection with the cases of Anik, Shauna, and Kevin. Ronald maintained his innocence, claiming that he had spent the day at home watching TV and had not gone out. Since he lived alone, no one could verify his alibi. Ronald stated that the conflicts between him and the young couple, Kevin and Shauna, were due to their constant insults and rude behavior, which led to arguments. He denied ever fighting with them, describing himself as a polite person. However, the police found his statements concerning because they were not convincing. They obtained a search warrant for his home, and during the search, they discovered a gun hidden in a bag of cat food. Ronald could not explain why he had the gun and quickly became agitated. Eventually, Ronald admitted to killing Shauna and Kevin. He explained that on the evening of January 2, he could not sleep and went outside. While he was out, his noisy neighbors, Shauna and Kevin, arrived and immediately began taunting and insulting him, as they often did. In a fit of rage, he lost control and ran home to get a gun and 3 gas cans. Upon returning outside, he found that Shauna and Kevin had already left. He knocked on their door, and when Shauna answered, he threatened her with the weapon. He forced them both into his car and drove away from the city. Kevin was driving. Ronald was in the front passenger seat, holding a weapon and pointing it at Kevin, while Shauna was in the back seat, unable to escape. She cried and begged Ronald to let them go. They drove for about 30 minutes until Ronald found a suitable deserted area. He ordered them to stop and shot Kevin twice in the temple, killing him instantly. Frightened, Shauna began to cry even louder and begged for her life. Ronald demanded that she be intimate with him, promising to release her afterward. Reluctantly, she agreed. However, after they were intimate, he realized that he could not spare her life because she might call the police. Coldly, he killed her as well. Ronald then moved Kevin's body into the trunk of his car, drove to a location closer to his home, and burned the car to destroy all evidence. He walked home through the fields and arrived at 4 a.m. Once home, he showered, burned his clothes, and threw the murder weapon into a ditch. Despite a thorough search, the weapon was never found. Ronald knew how to evade justice, so he carefully washed the blood and gunpowder residue off his hands. Eventually, Ronald Jansen was arrested, and the police began collecting evidence to prosecute him. Ronald was born on February 6, 1971, in Borsum, Limburg Province, Belgium. He was the third of 4 children in his family. His father worked as a miner, and his mother was a cleaner. Despite being a diligent student, Ronald faced bullying from his classmates due to his speech difficulties. Frustrated, he attacked his bullies with a baseball bat, which resulted in his suspension. After this incident, his mother enrolled him in another school, but the challenges continued. At home, Ronald suffered physical and mental abuse from his father. The fear of returning home and the constant violence caused him to have trouble sleeping. At one point, Ronald considered taking his own life or harming his father. Ultimately, he chose the latter. Ronald's father was diabetic and required insulin injections. Ronald switched the insulin with a dangerous substance, which his father accidentally injected. Although his father survived, he realized what Ronald had done. Instead of reporting Ronald to the police, he chose to abuse him even more. As a result, Ronald ran away from home and moved to a distant place. Using his skills, he enrolled in a university and eventually moved to Leuven. To support himself during his studies, Ronald worked part-time. Although he earned little money, he managed to save. In 1993, he graduated and began his career as a teacher. During his final year of study, Ronald met a girl named Natalie. She was from the Netherlands, 3 years older than him, and both attractive and kind. The young couple developed a strong relationship and began dating. After 2 years, they got married. For a while, they moved frequently because of Natalie's job. However, Ronald easily found teaching positions and quickly became a respected educator at every institution he joined. Eventually, they settled in Loxbergen, where Ronald began teaching not only computer science, but also mathematics and economics at the university. Intelligent, well-educated, and approachable, Ronald became popular among his colleagues and students. He enjoyed hiking outdoors, which helped him manage his insomnia. Ronald and Natalie dreamed of having a large family. Their first daughter was born in 1998, followed by their second daughter 3 years later. Unfortunately, having children began to put a strain on their marriage. Misunderstandings and conflicts arose between them. Ronald, who had long struggled with sleep problems, found it even harder to rest due to the constant crying of his newborn. His persistent insomnia made him irritable and aggressive, which frightened Natalie. Natalie went to the police and accused Ronald of abuse. She claimed that Ronald had given her sleeping pills and abused her while she was unconscious. Ronald denied the accusations, stating that he had given her the pills to calm her down and that everything between them had been consensual. The police doubted Natalie's testimony, and the case was eventually closed. Following this, Natalie filed for divorce, took the children, and left Ronald, who stayed behind and lived alone. He did not make an effort to maintain contact with his children. Neighbors often saw him wandering around at night, seemingly due to insomnia. Although they found his behavior strange, they were not particularly concerned. Had the police taken Natalie's accusations seriously, some of the subsequent tragedies might have been prevented. From the information available to them, it was evident that Ronald was a cunning man. His intelligence allowed him to destroy evidence and evade responsibility. Criminals like Ronald are among the most difficult to catch, and holding them accountable for their actions is an extremely challenging task. Surprisingly, Ronald admitted to killing Anik in 2007 and confessed to 3 other instances of abuse committed in a dormitory in Leuven during his university years. He claimed that he did not know the victims' names, could not remember the dates of the attacks, and could not describe the victims because it was too dark to see their faces. Ronald insisted that Anik's murder was accidental. According to Ronald, he could not sleep, so he drove to another city, where he encountered Anik cycling through the neighborhood. He blocked her path with his car, frightening her. Anik abandoned her bike and tried to run away, but Ronald caught her, tied her hands, and forced her into his car. He brought her to his home. Ronald claimed he had no intention of abusing or killing her, stating that he only wanted her to sleep in bed with him overnight and planned to release her the next morning. However, the next morning, Ronald got into an argument with his neighbors, Shauna and Kevin, who insulted him. Fearing that Anik might remember his identity and report him to the police, Ronald decided to kill her. At the same time, he also decided to abuse her. Ronald hit Anik in the head with a hammer in the bathroom and wiped the area with cleaning products to eliminate evidence. However, the police did not believe his explanation. They suspected the murder had a much deeper motive, and it appeared that Ronald had planned to kill her. The public was shocked when the truth was revealed. No one could believe that Ronald, a seemingly respectable man, could have committed such horrific crimes. Ronald's attorney sought to highlight his mental abnormalities and requested a psychiatric evaluation. Experts concluded that, although Ronald displayed certain psychological deviations, he was competent to stand trial. Psychiatrists described him as a latent psychopath and a serial killer who acted with intelligence and precision. His crimes followed a calculated pattern, beginning with abuse, breaking into dormitories to attack girls, and culminating in murder. Ronald has shown no remorse for his crimes. His humble and unassuming appearance helped him avoid suspicion. Ronald Jansen's trial began in late September 2011. The jury convicted Ronald Jansen of murder and abuse. Given his high risk of reoffending, the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In Belgium, a life sentence does not necessarily mean that the convicted individual will spend the remainder of their life in prison. Typically, those serving such sentences are imprisoned for between 15 and 23 years. After serving 15 years, Ronald will be eligible to apply for parole, which could potentially allow him to be released early. The families of the victims and others were outraged by the lenient sentence given to Ronald, who was responsible for taking at least 3 lives and abusing several young girls. The case of Megan Hargan. In 1983, Steve and Pamela Hargan welcomed their first daughter Megan, and 2 years later, their second daughter Ashley was born. Almost 8 years later, in 1993, they had another daughter, Helen. However, tensions within the family began to rise. Steve and Pamela started to argue, which ultimately led to their divorce while the girls were still young. Pamela received custody of the daughters, and soon after, she and the girls relocated to Potomac, Maryland. Pamela loves and cares for her daughters as well as for her work. She worked for a decade as a human resources manager before advancing to vice president at a large company. Neighbors noted that her daughters got along well and often played in their backyard with their pets. Due to her job requiring travel both domestically and internationally, eldest daughter Megan helped her mother raise her youngest sister Helen. Pamela's career peaked when her company merged with an international scientific applications corporation, resulting in a significant increase in her income. Despite this, she remained very diligent in her charity work and regularly donated part of her income to help people in difficult circumstances. She also provided generously for her family, ensuring her daughters had everything they wanted. Thanks to her professional success, Pamela was able to purchase a stunning property worth millions in a trendy area of Fairfax County, Virginia. The family's lifestyle was enviable, and Pamela took pride in her daughters, serving as a role model for others. However, they also faced envy from some. Beneath their seemingly perfect life, the family encountered common issues. As the girls grew older, a rivalry developed between them. Pamela noticed that Megan was facing the most difficulties due to her parents' divorce. This led her to develop feelings of jealousy and resentment towards her younger sister, Helen. She expressed her frustration by accusing their mother, Pamela, of favoring Helen. Her resentment deepened after Helen graduated high school and, like their mother, enrolled at the University of Dallas in 2014. At university, Helen became friends with a young woman named Erin. Initially, Erin viewed Helen as a modest and shy girl who rarely smiled. However, as they got to know each other better, they formed a close friendship. Erin discovered that Helen was actually a kind and sincere person dedicated to her studies. Despite her family's wealth and good standing, Helen took a part-time job as a waitress at a restaurant near the university. It was there that she met Carlos Gutierrez, a 30 years old from Texas. They quickly started dating, becoming nearly inseparable. In 2017, Helen's middle sister, Ashley, got married at the age of 32 and moved out of the family home. Megan, the eldest sister, also married at 34 to Frank, a man from West Virginia, and they had a daughter named Molly. When Frank went to serve in the military, Pamela welcomed Megan and Molly into her home, allowing them to stay as long as needed. That same year, Helen graduated from university. Although she had intended to move in with Carlos, she returned to Pamela's home in Virginia, where her older sister Megan and 6-year-old niece Molly were living. At that point, Pamela was pleased with her accomplishments and, at 63, intended to retire. She decided to renovate a house she planned to buy for her youngest daughter, Helen, in Northern Virginia. This decision upset Megan, who had always felt that her mother favored her younger sister. Over time, the relationship between the sisters, Megan and Helen, became very strained. Tamara North, the sister of Pamela and the girl's aunt, later confirmed this. She noted that Megan harbored feelings of resentment towards Helen. Having cared for Helen since she was a child, Tamara observed that Megan was unwilling to acknowledge her younger sister. Unlike Ashley, Megan refused to help care for Helen from the moment she was born and would not play with her. Although the rivalry was clear, no one could have predicted that this mix of jealousy, envy, and later greed would lead to a tragic outcome. On the evening of July 14, 2017, the neighbors of Pamela quickly realized something was wrong when they saw the Fairfax County Police arriving at the estate. The emergency call had come from Carlos, Helen's boyfriend, who was in Dallas, Texas, and far from the scene. He expressed concern for Helen's well-being after she had called him with a strange story about a shooting. When the police arrived at the building, it was already too late. A Upon inspecting the premises, they discovered the body of Pamela lying face down in the bathroom, covered with a blanket. It was evident that she had suffered a fatal head injury. Moving to the second floor of the spacious house, they found Helen in her bathroom. She was sitting on the toilet with a weapon between her legs and pointed upwards. It appeared that after killing her mother, Helen had ended her life by using her socked toe to pull the trigger after removing her shoe. As the investigation progressed, detectives realized that their initial hypothesis might not be correct. A family secret began to come to light. Officers secured the area around the house and interviewed neighbors. Detective Brian Byerson, who was leading the case, reached out to Steve, Pamela's ex-husband, to inform him of the tragic events. Overwhelmed with grief, Steve immediately called his other two daughters, Ashley and Megan. Megan, the oldest sister, said she was driving her daughter to West Virginia, but immediately turned around to go to her family's house. When Ashley and Megan arrived, both sisters were in shock and crying while speaking with the police. They both believed that Helen had ended her life, especially Megan. She recalled that when she left the house at 1:30 p.m., with her daughter Pamela and Helen were angry. She noted that both Pamela and Helen were very upset. Helen was particularly distressed because their mother had stopped helping her buy a house. Pamela, their mother, disapproved of Helen's relationship with Carlos and did not want Helen to move in with him. Besides, Megan said that Helen had been feeling angry and depressed for the past few months. During questioning, Ashley confirmed that Helen had previously faced emotional issues and had once talked about self-harm. Ashley also mentioned that their mother, Pamela, suspected Helen of using banned substances and wanted to seek help for her. A weapon found next to Helen confirmed that it belonged to Megan's husband, Frank. He had brought the weapon to Pamela's house because he had seen two suspicious men nearby a few days before the tragedy occurred. He requested that the police examine Megan for gunpowder residue on her hands. This was particularly important because Carlos's earlier statement had led the police in a different direction in their investigation. To uncover the truth, they needed to gather all available evidence, regardless of how confusing or insignificant it might seem, until the full story emerged. After a thorough investigation that lasted over a year, the lab confirmed the presence of gunpowder residue on Megan's hands, indicating that she had recently used a weapon. An autopsy revealed that Pamela had been shot twice, while Helen had only suffered one bullet wound. However, it was determined that the path of this bullet to Helen's neck was at an angle inconsistent with a self-inflicted gunshot. During the investigation at the scene, detectives noticed several unusual details. Pamela's phone was found on top of the blanket covering her, which seemed unnatural. Furthermore, no fingerprints were found on Helen's phone, despite the fact that she had called and texted Carlos before her death. There was also a small amount of blood on the weapon, raising suspicion since she should have had more blood if she had ended her life. This suggests that someone else pulled the trigger. Additionally, Megan's DNA was found in the bag with the weapon, which could be explained by her having brought the weapon into the house and handled it. Investigators discovered documents detailing Pamela's bank accounts and passwords, but these could not be used as evidence because they were not included in the search warrant. The day after the incident, Megan was allowed access to the property and belongings. When police conducted another search later, they included the albums and documents in their report, but they could not find them, indicating that someone had removed them. The strongest evidence against Megan, apart from Carlos's testimony and the police's suspicions, came from her own actions. Detectives found that just days before her mother and younger sister were killed, she was trying to buy a house for herself. She claimed she had her mother's financial help to close the deal, but in reality, she frequently changed jobs and had only $30 in her bank account. On the day of the murders, Megan needed to deposit over $400,000 to secure the purchase of her dream home. Court documents revealed that Megan was struggling financially and had tried to illegally transfer $420,000 from her mother's bank account, Pamela. Her plan was thwarted when Pamela's bank alerted her about the attempted transfer, prompting her to freeze the funds. This information was reported to the detectives by the finance department of the company, which became suspicious of the transaction and later learned about Pamela's death 5 days afterward. After the murder, Megan was called in for questioning again and was informed about the results of a fraudulent money withdrawal. Initially, she said that Pamela had wanted to transfer the funds. However, her story changed when investigators presented a recording of her conversation, and she admitted to calling the bank. Despite this, she continued to deny any involvement in her mother and younger sister's deaths. Investigators uncovered further evidence that Megan was responsible for the deaths of her mother and sister, and that she staged the incident to make it appear that Helen had killed their mother before ending her life. According to the investigators, Megan's motivation was jealousy. She felt that her mother favored her younger sister, which had troubled her throughout her life. When their wealthy and successful mother offered to buy Helen her own house, but refused to do the same for Megan, this left Megan feeling depressed and hopeless. Consumed by envy, resentment, and a desire for money, she was driven to commit these acts. The police believed that Megan had premeditated a double murder. 2 days before the incident, she spoke about suspicious men in their neighborhood, seemingly to explain the presence of the weapon in her home. Megan contacted the police to report the presence of strangers in the area. She also said that many other neighbors had similar concerns. On November 9, 2018, nearly a year and a half after Pamela and Helen's deaths, Megan was arrested at her new home in West Virginia, which she had purchased following the incident. The police held a morning press conference to announce her arrest. Detectives from the Serious Crimes Unit stated that Megan faced 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of using a weapon during the commission of the murders. Detective Brian Byerson reported that during a search of Megan's apartment, investigators uncovered crucial evidence, including a spreadsheet containing bank details and account passwords. These details were originally found in Pamela's house, but later vanished under mysterious circumstances. Megan has now appeared in court to face charges for the murders of her younger sister and mother. The final hearings in this controversial case occurred in March 2022. Alongside a significant amount of circumstantial evidence gathered by the prosecutors, one key factor in securing a conviction was the compelling testimony of Carlos Gutierrez. Carlos struggled to control his emotions as he continued his testimony. He explained that he asked Helen to leave the house, but she expressed concern for her niece Molly, who was also inside. Carlos could hear the fear in her voice over the phone, realizing how terrified she was in that moment. During subsequent calls, Helen mentioned that she could hear her mother, Pamela, dying. It seemed that Helen was following Carlos's advice to hide in a safe place, but when Carlos tried to reach her an hour later, she did not answer. Worried, he called 911 to report the situation. However, since he was in Texas, the operator informed him that they needed to contact local authorities first. After multiple calls to different numbers, Carlos finally managed to report that someone had died at the specified address and that he feared for Helen's safety. The prosecutor's office reported that Megan attacked Helen at 1 p.m. Around 1:15 p.m., Megan took Helen's phone and pretended to be her to reassure Carlos, claiming that she was fine. Ashley, the middle sister who was pregnant, also testified. She expressed regret that her son would grow up without knowing his grandmother and aunt, and that she could never have imagined that a killer was in their home. Megan's defense maintained that Helen was the one who killed Pamela and then ended her life, insisting that Megan was innocent. They argued that the police initially accepted this version, stating that Helen attacked their mother in the head after becoming upset when her mother changed her mind about buying her a house. After 13 days of trial, on March 28, 2022, Megan Hargan, who was 39 years old, was found guilty of murdering her mother, Pamela Hargan, and her younger sister, Helen Hargan, on July 14, 2017. The jury recommended a sentence of 20 years to life in prison for each murder. During the sentencing hearing in October, the judge sentenced Megan to 2 life terms in prison, following the jury's recommendations. However, on November 9, 2022, a judge overturned her double murder conviction due to juror misconduct. This decision was made after it was discovered that one juror attempted to recreate how Helen might have ended her life. The prosecutor announced plans to retry Megan for the crimes, and she remains in custody awaiting the new trial. In September 2023, Megan Hargan was tried and convicted a second time for the murder of her mother and younger sister. She was sentenced to life in prison in January 2024. After the verdict was announced, a trembling Megan leaned on her lawyer for support, while her younger sister Ashley burst into tears. Other family members of the Hargan family, present in the courtroom, embraced each other and wept after the trial. Ashley chose not to comment and preferred to keep her future plans private. Megan and her husband have divorced, and their daughter is now living with her father in West Virginia. This case highlights how jealousy and conflict among siblings can escalate if not addressed early. Such tensions can arise from minor issues and may grow into deep-seated animosity, threatening the bonds between children and parents. The case of Noreen Boyle. John Boyle Jr. is a chiropractor in Mansfield, Ohio. He has a successful practice, which is considered one of the best in the state. John and his wife, Noreen Boyle, have been married for over 20 years and have 2 children. In 1989, their eldest son, Collier, turned 11. They also adopted a 3-year-old daughter from Taiwan named Elizabeth. Noreen was born into a working-class family in Philadelphia and worked as a dental hygienist. She supported John through his schooling in the early years of their marriage, but after Collier was born, she became a stay-at-home mom. Thanks to John's successful career, the family enjoys a comfortable life. Their children attend private schools, travel, shop, and experience the World Cup without financial worries. Although the couple appears to be a model family from the outside, John has a disturbing personality. He was often abusive to his wife and displayed controlling behavior. Furthermore, he was unfaithful. John frequently pursued relationships with other women, a fact known to his friends, family, and Noreen. For years, she tolerated his behavior in an attempt to preserve the marriage for the sake of their children, despite being aware of his infidelity and his constant pursuit of younger women. Whenever she confronted him about his affairs, he reacted violently. In general, John could not tolerate any criticism of himself. Noreen's son, Collier, also felt the effects of his father's behavior from a young age. However, this situation could not last forever. In December 1989, Noreen filed for divorce. John did not want to end their marriage because he was happy with his family life and relationships. In an attempt to save their marriage, he planned to move his family and private practice to Erie, Pennsylvania, nearly 2 hours away from their old home. Their situation was not as promising as he had hoped. John persuaded Noreen to stay for New Year's and to continue working on their problems afterward. The family celebrated the holidays at their old home, with John's mother in attendance. He asked his mother to babysit the children because he planned to leave again after midnight when everyone was in bed. Later, Noreen and John argued on New Year's Eve. Elizabeth, the youngest daughter in the family, was confused by the situation, and Collier was worried. John's mother put Collier to bed, and just as he was about to fall asleep, he suddenly heard Noreen's loud scream, followed by 2 thuds, as if something had hit the wall, and then silence. Afterward, someone walked around the house for a long time, even opening the door and standing in the doorway for a while. Collier was so frightened that he pretended to be asleep and stayed that way until morning. Despite his fear, 11-year-old Collier got out of bed early on January 1. When everything was quiet, he explored the house. His mother was missing, but John seemed to be either awake or not yet asleep. Collier asked his father where his mother was. John replied that she had left after their argument. He assured Collier that she would be back soon, and John's mother agreed with him. The boy waited for Noreen to return, but days passed without her. Shelley Bowden, Noreen's best friend, had been in close contact with her, especially during her divorce. Shelley was quick to criticize John's claims about Noreen's disappearance. She had planned to meet Noreen for lunch just after New Year's to discuss important matters, but Noreen never showed up and ignored her calls. This behavior was completely out of character for the Noreen she knew, and Shelley worried that something was wrong. Shelley repeatedly stressed that Noreen would never abandon her child under any circumstances. Out of concern, Shelley reported Noreen missing to the police. However, the police dismissed her concerns and reminded her that adults have the right to go wherever they want without informing anyone. Shelley argued that Noreen was a responsible woman who would never leave her child, especially a 3-year-old who needed her. Collier picked up the phone book, found the police station number, and reported that something was wrong with his mother. The police responded quickly and went to Noreen's house. When they arrived, they immediately noticed that the boy looked scared and desperate for help. Unfortunately, they were unable to communicate effectively, but the police could see the fear in Collier's eyes, especially when he glanced at his father. When John asked the police who had contacted them, they did not reveal the truth, lying that one of Noreen's relatives had called. However, the police accepted John's explanation that she had simply left after an argument, and everyone believed it. Noreen was reported missing, and weeks passed without anyone questioning John's claim that she had left. However, Collier could not believe that his mother would abandon him. After hearing Noreen's relative's story, the police returned to Noreen's house. They searched every room thoroughly, but found no alarming evidence. Forensic experts examined the house and found no signs of foul play. Despite this, the police were able to speak to Collier, who recounted what he had heard on New Year's Eve, including Noreen's suspicious screams and banging on the walls. There was strong suspicion that John was involved in his wife's disappearance. Collier's sister, Elizabeth, who was 3 years old at the time, may have witnessed the incident. She told the police that she saw her father hit her mother on the head, then put her on the floor and wrapped her up like a snowman. However, due to her age, her testimony was not considered in the investigation. Soon after, a pregnant young woman named Sherry Lee Campbell moved into their home, replacing his wife. John claimed that Sherry was not pregnant with his child, and that they had only met after his wife had gone missing. He said that he had taken pity on Sherry and offered to let her stay. He also mentioned serious problems in his marriage and stated that Sherry would leave when his wife returned. While investigating the missing persons case, the police discovered revealing information about John's personal life. It turned out that his relationship with Sherry had been going on for much longer than he had admitted. There was a strong possibility that she was pregnant with his child, casting doubt on his story. Despite alarming details that raised suspicions, no concrete evidence was ever found, and Noreen remains missing. Furthermore, the theory that she ran away seems implausible. She had not made any purchases, used any credit cards, or contacted her children or relatives for weeks, which was highly suspicious. While examining the house and piecing together the events of Noreen's final days before her disappearance, the police learned that Noreen had been suffering from John's betrayal and infidelity for years. Sherry was the one having an affair with John, which drove Noreen away from her family. Sherry claimed that she only started dating John after his wife went missing, which was clearly untrue. Collier sought help because he was afraid of staying with his father, whom he believed was a murderer. While searching John's car, Collier discovered a photo of Sherry taken before New Year's. He considered showing it to the police. The photo was taken in front of a new house, so they decided to visit that location. Unfortunately, John refused to let them in, and they needed evidence to obtain a search warrant. More than 2 weeks after Noreen went missing, the police began to take the case more seriously, as her prolonged silence raised suspicions. Police discovered John's banking activities. They discovered that during the time Noreen was reported missing, John had made suspicious transactions. John rented a drill and purchased cleaning supplies from a hardware store, as well as quick-dry cement. He also frequently filled up gas in Erie, possibly during his visits to the new home. The investigation has now shifted its focus to the new house, as no evidence of a crime was found at the John family's old home. Collier said he noticed a ring on Sherry's finger that belonged to the boy's mother. He told his father this directly. The situation became more concerning when John told Collier that they were going to a neighboring state for fun the next day. He suggested a trip to a forest in the Highlands, which sounded very ominous and raised fears for the boy's safety. When the police arrived at the newly renovated house in Erie, it was clear that John had put a lot of effort into both the interior and exterior. However, the investigation focused on finding clues related to Noreen's disappearance and rescuing a boy from his father. The police searched the house meticulously, as such environments could hide bodies or evidence of a crime. The most intriguing discovery was in the basement. In a nearly empty room that was being renovated, they found a new carpet. When the rug was pulled back, they discovered a rectangle of freshly poured concrete. This anomaly caught the attention of the police, prompting them to investigate further by removing the concrete. While removing the concrete, they detected the smell of a decomposing human body. After completely removing the floor, they found a makeshift grave containing the body of a woman. Everyone immediately believed that this was Noreen's body. In the 3 weeks since her disappearance, the body had decomposed significantly. The condition of the body was so poor that dental records were needed for identification. Collier did not have to go with his father into the woods, where the boy could have been in danger. The police found the necessary evidence, ensuring that the boy was taken to Child Protective Services, where he would be safe. However, Noreen's tragic death was a huge shock to Collier. The boy had a deep bond with his mother. Noreen was not only his mother, but also his best friend. After discovering Noreen's body in her new home in Erie, the police found an expensive watch on her, which also served as a means of identification. Noreen's relatives noticed that her wedding ring was missing. According to a forensic expert, Noreen died between the night of December 31 and January 1. The police interviewed potential witnesses, especially neighbors who may have seen something unusual. A key witness was a man who lived next door and was awake from midnight to 4 a.m. on the night of the murder. He reported observing suspicious activity at John's house. Around 3 a.m., he saw John arrive with large bags. In the days that followed, John returned to the house frequently, working for hours and picking up heavy bags, which he then loaded into his car. The police suspected that the bags contained soil and construction debris, possibly related to the creation of a grave in the concrete floor. Interestingly, Sherry was wearing a ring that was identical to Noreen's missing ring. Collier could easily recall the ring his mother had worn, especially since there was a memorable story associated with the gift his mother had shared with him. This made him instantly recognize the ring on Sherry's hand. The police later learned that John had taken the ring from Noreen to give to his new partner, Sherry. Upon learning of this, Sherry was furious and immediately ended her relationship with John. The police then questioned John's mother, who had been with the children on the night of the incident. She claimed that she had not heard anything suspicious and vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Collier recalled an argument between his parents that he had heard before falling asleep. He was suddenly awakened by a terrifying scream and a loud bang on the wall, followed by silence. The police determined that John had inflicted a serious head injury on his wife. He then wrapped her head in a plastic bag, presumably to conceal any blood at the crime scene. John then went to check on his son, Collier. Collier vividly remembered his father standing in the doorway, staring at him. During this time, the boy pretended to be asleep, instinctively sensing danger. Collier now looks back on that moment with horror, wondering what his father might have done if he had realized that the boy was awake and had heard everything. Despite John's meticulous planning, he failed to create a credible story to explain his wife's disappearance. John cleaned the house thoroughly, leaving no forensic evidence of the crime. No traces of Noreen's DNA were found in the vehicle used to transport the body. Clearly, John was meticulous in his actions. When John struck his wife on the head, he avoided breaking the skin, resulting in no blood. He quickly covered her head with a bag, indicating intentionality. The pickup truck left no evidence, and not even the plastic bag covering her head left any fingerprints. Killers often leave traces on objects they forget to clean, but John was meticulous. He ensured that the entire crime scene was cleaned up after Noreen went missing. The police discovered circumstantial evidence. 2 days before his wife's death, John rented a drill, indicating that he was planning the murder. During the same period, he purchased cleaning supplies and quick-drying cement. John loaded his pickup truck with construction debris, waste, and soil, and drove to a location where he could dispose of it without restrictions. This decision turned out to be a serious mistake. When the police investigated and analyzed the debris, they confirmed that the concrete came from the basement of John's house. He had a motive to get rid of his troubled wife, Noreen, without going through a costly divorce. The investigation uncovered strong evidence against John, and Collier, who was only 12 years old, became a key witness. He understood that he would have to testify against his own father in court, which would greatly strengthen the prosecution's case. The prosecutor's office indicated that John could potentially face a prison sentence. For Collier, meanwhile, the situation posed difficult challenges. He struggled with the stigma of being known as the son of a murderer. Collier harbors resentment towards his father for taking away his mother through his terrible actions. John's defense team developed strategies to challenge the prosecution's case. They focused on undermining the prosecution's methods, arguing that many rules were ignored when interacting with child witnesses. Notably, no adults were present during many of the interviews, which the defense claimed was illegal. Furthermore, the defense believed that the police may have influenced the child to provide information that would incriminate his father in his mother's death, thus violating due process. John attempted to create a strong alibi to prove his innocence. He even convinced his brother to lie to the police, claiming that Noreen had called him. This made the investigation even more difficult for the police. The lie was exposed when it became clear that Noreen had died before that date. Despite this false testimony, John's brother did not face any charges. John's reputation as a successful chiropractor helped him maintain a positive image in the community. He was seen as a family man and a good father. He and Noreen had adopted a baby girl, and John was ready to have more children. At the time of the murder, Sherry Lee Campbell was pregnant and was able to prove that John was the father. Throughout the investigation, many questions arose about Sherry. Did she know about John's plan to kill his wife, or was she involved in the crime? These suspicions were fueled by her previous involvement in a real estate scam. A real estate broker reported seeing a young woman who looked like Sherry with Dr. John. However, the police found no evidence linking her to the crime or indicating that she knew about John's murderous intentions. She testified against him in court and cut off all contact with him afterward. Nevertheless, some people still believe that she may have had a role in the events that occurred. John's legal team presented their own arguments against the case. They identified errors in the autopsy report and even tried to argue that the body found in the basement was not Noreen's, but that of someone else who had been buried there earlier. However, the results of subsequent examinations confirmed that it was indeed Noreen's body, reinforcing the police's belief in John's guilt. As the jury deliberated, the atmosphere became tense. John Boyle Jr. was convicted of the premeditated murder of Noreen Boyle, and due to aggravating circumstances, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His lawyers subsequently appealed several times. In 2010, John requested a review of his sentence and sought clemency. Initially, the request was denied, but it was later granted, allowing him the opportunity for early release after 20 years. John's defense team continued to fight for him even after his 2020 parole hearing. For nearly 30 years he had denied killing his wife, but he eventually changed his story. John admitted to Noreen's death, but it was clear that he had been dishonest. His real intention was to have his sentence reduced and go free. He showed little remorse, claiming that he had pushed his wife in a fit of rage, causing her to accidentally fall and hit her head, resulting in her death. He refused to discuss other actions that suggested he had planned the crime. As a result, his request for parole was denied, and he remained in prison. John's family shunned Collier, and Noreen's relatives were unable to adopt the boy because they were too old. He was adopted by a caring family in Canada. As he grew older, Collier changed his last name. He initially worked as a magazine model before becoming a successful cameraman in Los Angeles. He eventually teamed up with a renowned director and produced a documentary in 2018 that recounted the story of his mother, Noreen Boyle's death, as well as his fight for freedom and the horror of his father's crimes. While making the film, Collier visited his father in prison nearly 30 years after John was convicted of murder. During their meeting, John claimed that he had accidentally killed his wife during an argument when she lunged at him with a knife, and he instinctively pushed her away. Collier did not believe his father's story, but chose to forgive him. Despite this, John still harbored resentment toward Collier and did not consider him part of his family. The case of Jody Herring. In the small town of Berlin, Vermont, there lived a young woman named Jody Herring. Born in 1975, she came from a large family. In her early years, Jody was known to be a happy child, close to her father, and naturally bright and energetic. However, as she grew older, Jody faced several tragic incidents. The first and most traumatic occurred when she was about 5 years old. Her father was found dead on the lawn of their family home. It was believed he ended his life, as a weapon with his fingerprints was found near his hand. Jody was home at the time, and her father's death came as a shock to her. She gradually became deeply saddened by the loss, but she and her family were convinced that her father had not intended to harm himself. Shortly before his death, Jody's father revealed that he always kept a weapon nearby, even hiding a weapon under his pillow at night. This weapon was found at the scene of his death, and witnesses reported that it was placed in his hand. Ultimately, it was concluded that he ended his life. Following this tragedy, Jody began experiencing frequent seizures, but her family did not seek help from a psychiatrist. The family's neglect towards Jody was evident in many ways, affecting her emotions and behavior as she grew up. Family members and others observed her sitting for hours, staring blankly into space, seemingly unaware of her surroundings. One aunt described Jody as being completely detached from the world, while another noted that Jody always had a lifeless expression during her youth. Jody faced abuse from her mother and some relatives. The neglect escalated to the point where, at just 11 years old, Jody and her 14-year-old brother were kicked out of their home by their mother. After that, Jody often slept in the back seat of a car, and during particularly difficult times, she stayed with her grandparents. As a result, Jody grew up in a troubling and challenging environment. At 17, She was abused, which led to her first pregnancy and the birth of her child. A few years later, she had two more children out of wedlock. As she entered adulthood, Jody faced uncertainty and distress. Her daily life revolved around drinking and using banned substances, and her mental health continued to decline without proper care. Despite being a mother of three, Jody was homeless. She did not have stable housing and often moved in with relatives to avoid living on the streets. Jody had multiple encounters with law enforcement and was known to the authorities for various offenses. Her legal troubles began in November 1998, when, at 23 years old, she was arrested for driving under the influence. This incident resulted in several months in jail. In June 2001, Jody faced charges of selling counterfeit goods, and just 5 months later, she was convicted again of drunk driving. In May 2003, Jody was charged and convicted for possessing a banned substance. By November 2015, it became evident that she had repeatedly broken the terms of her probation. Concerned about her lifestyle, social services began to investigate how her children were being cared for. Unfortunately for Jody, but possibly better for her children, the Department of Children and Family Affairs took them away one by one. Ultimately, only one child remained in Jody's custody, while her other children were placed with foster parents. Jody tried her best to keep her youngest child close. However, when she and her youngest daughter became homeless, the school principal discovered this. He offered to help them, but during their conversations, he realized that Jody was very inconsistent in her reasoning, and her actions lacked logic. It was unclear whether this was due to her frequent use of banned substances or a decline in her mental health. Despite the offer of assistance, Jody firmly rejected help from the school. This made people who genuinely wanted to help her feel that she had no desire to change her bad habits for the sake of her youngest child. Therefore, the school principal decided that Jody was unable to care for her youngest daughter in her current mental state, prompting a call to the Department of Family and Children's Affairs once again. At this point, Jody was feeling increasingly anxious and fearful about the possibility of losing her last child. Sadly, her addiction overshadowed her anxiety. Even though she was homeless, Jody continued to drink and use banned substances, which further worsened her mental health. Her apathy and refusal to change eventually led to her youngest daughter being taken away for the child's safety. When Jody discovered that the school principal had reported her to the Department of Family and Children's Affairs, she became extremely angry. Witnesses said that Jody lost control and was unable to think clearly. She expressed a desire to harm everyone involved in taking her children. She was consumed by her anger and sought revenge, blaming those around her. She showed her partner, Henry Premont, a handwritten list of people she wanted to kill, starting with her two cousins, Rhonda and Regina. It was clear that Jody was having dangerous thoughts. She attempted to buy a weapon twice but was denied both times after background checks. In May 2015, Jody's emotional and mental state began to deteriorate when she called Rhonda and Regina and threatened them. They found the call very disturbing, so they called emergency services to check on Jody. When the ambulance arrived, they found Jody lying on her bed in a semi-conscious state, surrounded by empty pill bottles and photos of her children, indicating a possible attempt to end her life. Following this incident, Jody was mandated to undergo mental health treatment at a nearby facility for 90 days. This treatment was intended to help Jody recover and get the support she needed. However, Jody was disruptive and did not want to continue treatment. Instead, she asked to be released. Consequently, just a month later, she was released, despite the doctor's recommendation to continue. The doctor had highlighted her instability, but his advice was not binding, and the facility decided to let her go. Unfortunately, she returned to her old environment, making the decision of the medical facility a mistake for which they had to suffer the consequences. On August 7, 2015, in the small town of Berlin, Vermont, Tiffany, Rhonda's daughter and Jody's niece, was preparing to visit a friend. Before leaving, she stopped to listen to a message on the answering machine. In the message, she heard Jody's angry voice, warning that Rhonda and Regina should stop calling the department, or she would kill them. Tiffany wasn't worried because such outbursts were typical of Jody's behavior, so she ignored the message and continued to meet her friend. Just 2 hours later, Jody's brother Dwayne received 2 voice messages from her. He was busy and couldn't answer the phone in time, but in the messages, Jody urged him to contact her immediately, saying he might regret not contacting her sooner. Jody leaves her temporary home and goes to the place she hates the most, the Department of Children and Families. When she arrived, she turned off the car and sat inside, seemingly waiting for something. Passers-by saw her screaming in the car, but it appeared she was only talking to herself. Despite her distress, no one stopped to check on her. They were all too busy with their own lives. It was unclear why Jody was outside the Department of Children and Family Affairs. Perhaps she was waiting for someone, but her children were in the care of others and could not be there. Shortly after 5 p.m., a woman named Laura Sobel emerged from the building. Laura, 48 years old, is a social worker with the Vermont Department of Children and Families. She was recognized for her intelligence. She attended the University of Vermont, earning a bachelor's degree in political science in 1989, followed by a master's degree in social work. Since 2002, she had dedicated herself to the Department of Children and Family Affairs, where she found her passion for helping those in need. At the beginning of her career, Laura met Timothy Farini. They fell in love, moved in together, and had 2 beautiful daughters, Julia and Ilona. Laura had a kind heart and was committed to supporting families who were less fortunate than her own. Laura was assigned to handle Jody's case, a decision made without any specific reasoning. This assignment could have easily gone to another available social worker. However, Jody perceived the situation differently. She blamed Laura for her daughter's removal, which is why she was waiting in the parking lot. On August 7, 2015, Laura finished her work as usual. After a long and tiring day, she felt relieved to leave and spend time with her family. As Laura exited the building, Jody stepped out of her car. Before closing the door, Jody retrieved a large object from inside. It was a weapon. Jody approached Laura, and she didn't have time to escape. Jody suddenly raised the weapon and attacked Laura in the face. After Laura collapsed, Jody attacked her again at close range, killing her instantly. Jody began jumping around the parking lot, brandishing the weapon and shouting that they deserved it for taking her 9-year-old daughter away. It was evident that Jody was aware of her actions. After she placed the weapon on the sidewalk, 2 bystanders quickly knocked her to the ground. Jody did not struggle. Instead, she calmly waited for the police to arrive. She had accomplished her goal, and nothing else mattered to her. When the police showed up, they noticed that Jody appeared calm and even laughed. As an officer helped her up, he spotted a red stain on her boot and asked her about it. Jody smirked, brushed it off with her boot, and described it as a trifling matter. In reality, it was Laura's blood. Jody was promptly taken into custody. Following her arrest, a more tragic story began to emerge. On the morning of Jody's arrest, her niece Tiffany, unaware of the situation, decided to visit her mother Rhonda, Aunt Regina, and grandmother Julianne Falzerano. Tiffany hadn't heard from them in almost a day, which was unusual since they typically called daily. By 8 a.m., Tiffany was driving to their house on Airport Road in Berlin. When she and her friend arrived, they noticed the front door was wide open. As they entered, Tiffany was met with a horrifying sight. She found her mother and grandmother lying on the floor, both dead. They had been attacked in the head. Tiffany hurried upstairs, anxious to find Regina alive, but sadly, her aunt had also been killed. It appeared that Regina had fought back before she died, and the police were called. After a thorough investigation, detectives discovered that the bullets came from the weapon that Jody had used. Devastated and searching for answers, Tiffany could only think of one person who could have harmed her family, Jody Herring. As a result, the charges against Jody changed from one murder to multiple counts of murder, leaving the community in shock. The trial received significant media attention, particularly concerning Jody's mental health. Psychiatrists conducted a comprehensive evaluation and diagnosed her with severe anxiety disorder. This condition likely contributed to her inability to trust others and her repeated refusal of available help. Nevertheless, this mental health issue did not exempt her from facing legal consequences. Jody was declared sane and competent to stand trial. During the trial, Jody appeared emotionally detached, often staring blankly. However, she expressed her true feelings when talking to Rhonda and Regina's family. She said that she had never been a bad person in her life and wished she could go back to that day, although she also admitted that it was impossible. The jury learned that the weapon used in the killings belonged to her partner, Henry Premont, with whom she had been living, and that she had taken the weapon without his knowledge. After the trial, Jody Herring was found guilty of second-degree murder for the deaths of her cousins, Rhonda and Regina, as well as her aunt, Julianne Falzerano. She received a 20-year sentence for each life lost. Additionally, she was convicted of first-degree murder for the murder of Lara Sobel, resulting in a life sentence without the chance of parole. Later, she attempted to appeal her sentence, but the court denied her request due to concerns that she would remain a danger to herself and society. In conclusion, Jody will spend the rest of her life in prison. Some may feel sympathy for her because she lost her children, but her cruel actions mean she will never see them again. This case has raised many questions about the role of social workers and how to prevent crimes linked to mental health. For instance, why was Jody allowed to leave the psychiatric ward so soon despite her emotional instability? Would staying in treatment have made a difference? How did Jody gain access to weapons? And are social workers being adequately protected from dangerous individuals? Jody's actions have caused immense suffering, affecting both the Herring family and Lara's family, as well as her own. Lara's children will grow up without a mother, and Tiffany will suffer the effects of losing her family. After Lara's death, the University of Vermont, where she earned her degrees, offered full scholarships for her children to honor her. While improvements are slow, there is an ongoing effort to enhance the safety of social workers. The case of Ted Shaughnessy. Ted Shaughnessy, born on February 7, 1963, is the youngest of 3 children. His family lived near Phoenix, Arizona. From a young age, all the siblings in the family developed a love for fast cars. Ted dreamed of owning sports cars and was passionate about everything related to them. Relatives and friends described Ted as a kind and fun-loving person. In the early 1980s, he met a woman named Corey at a hair salon in Phoenix. They began dating, and in the late 1980s they got married. The couple later moved to Austin, Texas, where they started a jewelry business together. Corey had a deep passion for gems and fine arts and worked as an appraiser in their family business. In contrast, Ted was friendly and approachable, easily building relationships with customers and partners, which helped secure profitable deals while keeping everyone happy. Their family business continued to grow, and they bought a new house near their store. By 2000, the couple still had no children. In the spring of 2000, they traveled to Ukraine and adopted a 1.5-year-old boy, whom they named Nick. This moment marked the long-awaited beginning of parenthood for the family. Over the years, Nick grew up and developed a love for fast cars, just like his father. To share these experiences, Nick and Ted often went go-karting together, and Ted also took his son for rides in a sports car. Over time, Nick began to show an aptitude for business. He started selling chocolate bars from his school locker and always had pocket money. While in high school, he developed a hobby of disassembling cars. In 2015, he met a girl named Jackie Edison. who had recently moved to Texas from New York. The two were immediately attracted to each other, but Nick's parents, Ted and Corey, disapproved of Jackie, feeling that she was not the right person for him. However, they chose not to interfere in the relationship in order to maintain a good relationship with Nick. After high school, the couple moved into a house near a university. Jackie planned to study engineering, while Nick pursued a business degree. During this time, Nick also became interested in trading. Despite living far from home, he still made the 2-hour trip to Austin every weekend to visit his parents. Life seemed to be on track, and there was no sign of trouble ahead. Early in the morning of March 2, 2018, at 4:30 a.m., Ted and Corey were awakened by the sound of their dog barking. This was not unusual, as dogs often react to possums or other small animals that sometimes wander onto the family property. Corey believed there was no reason to worry. Ted decided to go check out the disturbance. Since the couple lived in Texas, he brought his .45 caliber pistol for protection. According to Corey, she quickly fell asleep after Ted left to investigate. However, just a few minutes later, she was awakened by a loud bang coming from the kitchen, followed by several more. Panicking, Corey grabbed the gun she had left by the bed and ran to help her husband. As she stepped out of the bedroom, she noticed their dog. Suddenly, she was shot while standing in the doorway, and a dark figure appeared, looking menacing. In a panic, Corey fired all 6 bullets from her pistol toward the door, unsure of who or what was there. After firing, she ran into the closet to hide, fearing for her life and expecting the intruder to find her and shoot her. While in the closet, she grabbed her phone and called 911. She reported that someone had broken into the house and that she had shot one of the attackers. During the call, Corey heard faint moaning coming from somewhere in the house. She couldn't identify who was making the sound. Worried that her husband might have been injured in the gunfight, she felt an overwhelming urge to go help him. However, the police insisted that she stay in the closet, warning her that it might be too dangerous to leave. 15 minutes later, Corey was notified that the police had arrived at her house. By then, the moaning had stopped, and an eerie silence had fallen over the house. Cautiously, Corey walked out of the closet and toward the front door. As she passed through the kitchen, she saw her husband, Ted, lying motionless on the floor, surrounded by bullet casings. Overwhelmed with shock, Corey tried to open the front door, but found no one there. It turned out that the police had gone to the wrong house. At the time, they were at a neighbor's house, trying to determine where the gunshots had come from. They eventually realized their mistake and rushed to Corey's house, where they found her trembling on the doorstep. The officers quickly got back into their car and drove to Corey's home, arriving around 8 a.m. There, they met Corey, who was deeply distressed and struggling to process the events that had unfolded. Although still in shock and uncertain about the details, she knew her husband had died. Over the next 3 months, Corey's son Nick and his girlfriend Jackie moved in with her to provide support. Friends and acquaintances of the family were horrified by the tragedy. Ted was described as a kind and hard-working man who had built his life with integrity and deserved to spend his later years in peace. No one believed he had any enemies capable of such a violent act. Speculation soon arose that the motive for the attack might have been linked to the family's wealth, as their home contained many valuable items. Police examined the crime scene and found 2 different types of ammunition, suggesting there were 2 attackers, each using a different handgun. There were no signs of forced entry, but police discovered an open window in a distant bedroom, where a surveillance camera had been removed. It appeared the attackers had entered the house through this window. A forensic scientist discovered fingerprints at the scene, which were immediately sent to a lab for analysis. In the room where Nick had been staying, police found a chest of drawers that had previously held a .40 caliber handgun. However, the gun was missing and turned out to be the only item stolen from the house. Since the caliber matched one of the guns used in the shooting, police suspected it was the murder weapon. After interviewing the Corey family and their neighbors, Police learned that the family owned a high-value jewelry store, which was well known in the area. Corey, her son Nick, and Jackie surrendered their cell phones to assist in the investigation. Nick, who had an alibi because he was 2 hours away from his parents' home at the time of the attack, supported his story with phone records and the security system he had installed at his parents' house. However, the security system had been turned off on the night of the shooting, which immediately raised suspicions. Nick explained that this was not unusual, as his parents sometimes left the system off when they were both at home. Nevertheless, even when the system was in sleep mode, it still recorded some activity. Police discovered that the criminals likely broke into the house at 4:27 a.m., which was the exact time the system was disabled. The next signal from the system was recorded at 4:44 a.m., giving the criminals only about 17 minutes to search the house. Rumor had it that the house contained millions of dollars worth of jewelry, gold, safes, and other valuables. However, nothing appeared to have been stolen, making robbery an unlikely motive. Adding to the mystery was the strange behavior of the family dogs. How could they neither hear nor smell the intruders and fail to alert the family for 17 minutes? Dogs would normally bark even if an unfamiliar car stopped in the driveway. Clearly, something was wrong. The first person the police suspected was Corey. Suspicion fell on her because she was the sole beneficiary of Ted's life insurance policy, which was set to pay her $1 million. Shortly after her husband's death, she contacted the insurance company to file a claim. She argued that, after her husband's death, the company he managed began to face serious challenges. Sales dropped significantly, customers left, and delivery problems arose, creating an urgent need for money. However, the insurance company denied her claim because she was already a suspect in her husband's murder. This was how Corey found out she was under investigation, much to her outrage. Nick and his girlfriend Jackie were also considered suspects. When the police searched Nick and Jackie's home, they discovered a marriage certificate. It turned out that the young couple had secretly married 8 months earlier, without informing their parents. Nick's mother only learned about the marriage through the police, which shocked her. Corey gave Jackie a piece of gold jewelry adorned with diamonds as a wedding gift. Shortly after, Nick and his wife took over the family jewelry store. These changes seemed to help Corey cope with the pain of his loss. Meanwhile, the police received the results of the fingerprint analysis from the window of the Corey family home. The fingerprints were found to belong to the installer who had installed the window years ago and had not returned since. This man lived in Minnesota, not Texas, and had a solid alibi. However, the police could not disregard the window, as it appeared to be the most logical point of entry for the perpetrator. During an interrogation, one of the officers noticed that Nick repeatedly mentioned using the window to enter his house when he came home drunk from a party, or when he did not want to wake his sleeping parents. Interestingly, the police had not told him that this could have been how the intruder entered the house. In another interview, Nick mentioned his best friend, Spencer Patterson. The two had been close for years, and Spencer frequently visited Nick's family home. Spencer, who came from a poor background and disliked his job, may have secretly envied Nick, who was wealthier and more fortunate. Nick had told Spencer that a particular window in the house was often left unlocked, which the police believed could have been the intruder's entry point. Spencer was also familiar with the layout of the house, including the location of the family safe and gun boxes. During one of the interviews, Nick revealed that he had previously given Spencer a .380 caliber pistol. This detail raised suspicion because cartridges of the same caliber were found at the scene of the massacre, linking it to one of the murder weapons. The police decided to question Spencer, who admitted that he was familiar with the window in question and had visited Nick's house several times. Spencer also handed over the .380 caliber pistol that Nick had given him. However, after conducting a ballistics test, it was confirmed that the gun was not used in the murder, proving that Spencer was not involved in the case. Spencer, however, pointed the police toward another, more likely suspect, Nick. The police could not ignore the fact that Nick was eager to propose numerous theories about the case, none of which proved useful. This raised suspicions about whether he was involved in Ted's death. Throughout the investigation, Nick's behavior drew attention. The day after the murder, he independently questioned the neighbors as if he were taking over the investigation. When the police conducted fingerprint and DNA tests on everyone present in the house, Nick's behavior was notably strange. It was discovered that Nick was experiencing significant financial difficulties. His business ventures were unprofitable, and he had spent all the money his parents had given him. Nick's independent projects had stalled, and he showed no intention of finding a job. For a long time, his parents had supported him, covering all his expenses, but they had hoped he would eventually become self-sufficient. Just before the tragedy, Nick's parents had loaned him $30,000 with the intention of funding his future college education. However, instead of pursuing his studies, he spent the money on trading, as he had always done. Disappointed, his parents decided to stop supporting him financially, hoping this would motivate him to take responsibility and start building his own career and life. To reinforce this, they asked Nick and Jackie to live separately. His parents believed that living apart from his girlfriend might encourage him to consider college, much like Jackie. Instead, Nick borrowed another $5,000 from a family friend and continued gambling it all on trading. He ultimately failed and never repaid the loan. Police suspect that these financial troubles may have been the motive for the attack. However, Nick had an alibi. It seemed likely that he did not personally shoot his father, so the police needed to determine who had committed the crime. The police returned to Nick and Jackie's home. This time, they found several bullet boxes, with the brand and caliber of the bullets matching those found at the crime scene. The investigation also uncovered another lie. Nick had previously claimed that he had not visited his parents' home for a long time, but the police discovered that he had been there just a few days before the tragedy. Although Nick denied this, the police obtained irrefutable evidence proving he had lied. Another suspicious detail emerged. 2 days before the attack on Ted, there was an unusual gap in the communication records between Nick and Jackie. The two had been in regular contact via phone and text, but during this particular period, they had stopped communicating entirely. When their cell phones were examined, it became clear that the devices had been deliberately wiped clean shortly before the investigation began. Many messages had been edited or deleted, and the phones had been factory reset. However, they had overlooked the fact that all the data had been backed up on a computer. The reason behind their hasty attempt to clean the phones soon became clear. Turns out the couple was facing much more serious financial troubles than Nick had disclosed to his parents. The police decided to question Spencer again, suspecting that he was withholding information. Spencer eventually confessed that, shortly before Ted was murdered, Nick had approached him with an offer to pay him to carry out a murder. The plan was to kill both of Nick's parents. If the plan succeeded, Nick would inherit about $8 million, including business assets. Spencer revealed that he had been promised a share of the money. However, Spencer refused to commit the crime, prompting Nick to threaten to kill him if he revealed anything about the plan. Corey, shocked and refusing to believe the accusations, hired Austin's best lawyer to defend Nick. She believed that Nick had been victimized by the same arbitrary police actions she had experienced during the initial investigation. On May 29, 2018, Nick and Jackie were arrested for solicitation of murder, a crime punishable by death under state law. 2 months later, Jackie was released on bail. Corey had hoped that Nick would soon be cleared and released, but the situation took a drastic turn when the investigation exposed the real culprits. Police reviewed surveillance footage from the house, dated February 28, which showed 2 unidentified men. One of them was later identified as Cameron Vosmek, an employee of a window company whose fingerprints had been found early in the investigation. Upon contacting the window company, authorities confirmed Cameron's identity. When police visited his home again, Cameron was absent. Instead, They spoke to his wife, who immediately admitted she knew the reason for their visit. She revealed that her husband had denied any involvement in the crime, but implicated his co-worker, 25-year-old Johnny Leon. When police located Johnny, he initially denied any wrongdoing, but eventually confessed. Johnny revealed that Nick had offered him $100,000 to kill someone close to him. Johnny admitted to being an accomplice, overwhelmed with guilt to the point of requesting the death penalty for himself. He confessed to using a .40 caliber gun provided by Nick, a weapon that had previously been reported missing from Ted's home. Police further discovered that Nick had disabled the security system on the property. This revelation horrified Corey, who now faced the devastating reality of her son's true nature. She realized that for 3 months after Ted's death, she had unknowingly lived under the same roof as the person who had plotted to kill her. Nick attempted to justify his actions, claiming that his father had been suffering from chronic depression and that he was merely aiding his father by ending his life. Corey staunchly refuted Nick's claim, asserting that Ted had no history of mental health issues. Meanwhile, Nick's wife, Jackie, denied any involvement in the crime, claiming ignorance of her husband's plans. Jackie initially refused to cooperate with the police and sought to avoid responsibility. However, it later emerged that she had been aware of Nick's intentions. Jackie claimed she had tried to dissuade Nick from proceeding with the crime, but her statement was met with skepticism. Although she could have warned the police, Jackie chose not to. Jackie eventually agreed to cooperate with the investigation, which earned her release on bail. She testified against Nick, resumed her college education, and returned to her daily life. Meanwhile, authorities identified the second accomplice in Ted's murder as Ariane Smith. Despite the severity of their crimes, Nick Shaughnessy, Johnny Leon, and Ariane Smith avoided the death penalty by striking plea deals with the prosecution. In April 2021, they each pleaded guilty to lesser charges and were sentenced to 35 years in prison, with the possibility of parole. As of June 2023, all three remain incarcerated. Jackie received a much lighter sentence for her cooperation. She served 4 months in prison and was placed on 10 years of probation. The case of Lori Bray. Lori Bray lives in the small town of Laurel, in Yellowstone County, Montana. Lori, who is 57 years old, is known for being friendly and welcoming. She lives in a quiet area with her 2 dogs. Her friends and neighbors consider her to be one of the nicest people around. Every day, she calls her children and grandchildren. Lori maintains close relationships with her family and neighbors. Lori works at a casino, and on September 30, 2019, she finished her shift and went home around midnight. She was supposed to report to work at 8:30 a.m. on October 1, but she did not show up. This was unusual because Lori is very responsible in her job. When the manager tried to call Lori but was unsuccessful, she decided to check on Lori herself to find out what was going on. The manager started driving around her workplace, hoping to see Lori. On a deserted road, she spotted a car that looked similar to Lori's. From a distance, it seemed like something was off about the location of the car and the surrounding area, as it was parked in a place surrounded by fields. She decided not to approach the car because she wasn't sure if it was indeed Lori's. Instead, she parked at a safe distance and called Lori's son to express her concern about Lori's disappearance. Lori's son mentioned that he hadn't received his mother's usual morning call, which was unusual and made him worried. He had also tried calling her earlier, but her phone did not respond to either calls or texts. Lori's son returned home to find his mother's car missing from its usual spot. No one answered the door when he knocked. He looked through the window, but saw no one inside. The dogs were there, appearing restless, which worried him because Lori always took care of her pets and never let them go hungry. It seemed that his mother might not have come home from work. He looked around the house but did not notice anything unusual. Using his key to enter, he saw that the bed was made, but none of his mother's belongings were there. The kettle was cold, indicating that she had not cooked breakfast or spent the night there. Concerned, he called his mother's manager to inform her that Lori was not home. He suspected that his mother had not returned from work and mentioned that the car the manager had seen was likely Lori's, suggesting that they check on it. The manager agreed to check on the car and waited for him to arrive. As he drove up, they approached a 2003 Lexus, which was unlocked and clearly Lori's car. They opened the door and looked inside, finding Lori's purse and her cell phone, which was still on. The phone had several missed calls. They decided not to continue searching the car to avoid losing any evidence and quickly called the police. When the police arrived and opened the car, they immediately noticed some alarming signs: blood stains on the driver's seat, a boot print, and Lori's dirty shoes. Lori's torn clothes were found, indicating that a struggle had taken place. This evidence suggested that something terrible had happened. As a result, the police began searching for her, fearing that she might have been attacked and possibly killed. The community around Lori's home reacted strongly to her disappearance. Many people shared information about her on social media, distributed flyers, and actively participated in the search efforts. The area was very quiet, with almost no incidents. Attacks were rare and caused a strong reaction from the local people. The media covered the case, hoping to draw attention and find anyone who might know something about the events of that tragic night, but no one came forward. The case left the community extremely uneasy, as residents feared that a dangerous killer was still on the loose. Concerned locals knew that Lori had set up a fund to support her family and care for the dogs she had left behind. Lori's car was found in a large area filled with fields, dirt, and grass, making it difficult for the police to find clues. Many people joined the search the next morning. Meanwhile, police discovered that around 1 a.m., the local sheriff had come across Lori's car but had not conducted a thorough search. Surveillance footage from the casino showed no suspicious activity. Lori was performing her routine duties, cleaning up after her shift, and then went home without incident. Police sought witnesses who had been at the casino that day to see if anyone had noticed anything unusual. They interviewed several visitors, but did not receive any useful information. The surveillance footage showed that there were only a few customers in the casino that day. In the hours before she left, Lori had only a few brief interactions with customers, including 2 women at the bar and a man who arrived at the casino around 11 p.m. Lori served him a drink and checked his ID, which was part of her standard procedure to confirm he was of legal age. The young man remained at the casino until late at night. Nothing unusual happened inside the casino after that. The young man calmly left, followed by Lori. Meanwhile, the police began reviewing the security footage from outside the casino. Lori left the casino with her belongings, locked the doors, and got into her car just after midnight. Before leaving, she had a brief conversation with the same young man who had left before her. After their conversation, he got into the passenger seat of her car, and they drove away together. The casino was deserted at this point, leading to suspicions that this man was the last person to see Lori before she disappeared. The police needed to identify this man. They showed the surveillance footage to casino employees and customers, who recognized him as 24-year-old Diego Hernandez. The police decided to speak to him immediately and went to his registered address. Diego confirmed that he was the person in the video. He explained that he had asked Lori for a ride because he had been at the casino too long and had no way to get home. Lori agreed to drive him, and after dropping him off, she left. Diego then went to another party to continue his night, claiming that he never saw Lori again. Although Diego's explanation seemed plausible, The police remained suspicious of the fresh scratches on his hands and face. They asked him about the source of the scratches. Diego claimed that he had gotten into an argument with a friend before going to the casino, and that a ring with a sharp edge had caused the injuries. He spoke calmly and confidently, answering the police's questions without hesitation, which made him seem trustworthy. The police found no inconsistencies in his story, and they therefore left. Diego's alibi needed to be verified, as there were no other leads to pursue. The police spoke to the friend who had allegedly argued with Diego shortly before Lori's disappearance. The friend confirmed that they had met a few days earlier, but insisted that there had been no fight. The police reviewed the casino security footage again to see if there were any scratches on Diego's face, but the video quality was poor. They then discovered that he had been to a bar before going to the casino and requested the bar's surveillance camera footage. This footage confirmed that there were no visible scratches on his face. While they continued to gather information, a man reported to the police at 7:30 p.m. that he had seen the body of a woman while driving an ATV in the woods. The police quickly arrived at the scene and located the woman's body, lying in a ditch and covered in mud. They believe the body found is Lori, who is missing. The body had multiple severe injuries, indicating that the attacker may have kicked or hit her several times. Lori's body was found 3 kilometers from her car, and there were multiple scratches on her body, especially on her face, which was severely injured. Forensic experts later determined that she had 2 broken ribs and signs of strangulation. Lori was not killed at the scene where her body was found. It had been brought there later. There was evidence of dragging on her back. It is possible that she was killed in the car where bloodstains were found or nearby. During the investigation, the police found a clear shoe print at the scene that matched the shoe print inside Lori's car. This shoe print could be important evidence and should be compared with the shoes of Diego, who is a suspect. The autopsy results showed that Lori died from strangulation. Experts found evidence that she had been abused, as some of the wounds on her body contained male DNA. The police continued to investigate the information provided by Diego. They checked the data related to the location of Lori's phone and found that she had never been to Diego's house, contrary to his claims. This further cast doubt on his credibility. Furthermore, in interviews with employees from another bar that Diego had previously visited, the police learned that he had harassed the staff there. He acted aggressively and rudely, insisting that they give him a ride home, but all the employees refused. The police gathered enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for Diego's home. They discovered a pair of Nike sneakers, which were subsequently sent to a lab for analysis. It was found that the sneakers had recently been washed. The results indicated that the sneakers matched the shoe prints found in Lori's car. The police also found the clothes that Diego had been wearing at the bar and casino on the day Lori went missing. However, these items had been thoroughly washed with bleach. The clothes were sent for testing to check for blood or DNA evidence, but unfortunately, no traces were found after the washing. The police examined Diego's phone and found suspicious search queries, such as how long does an investigation last, and when do FBI agents get involved in an investigation. Diego was therefore brought in for further questioning, and a DNA sample was taken from him to compare with the sample found on Lori's body. During re-interrogation, Diego became nervous and changed his story. He said that he and Lori had known each other for a long time. Diego claimed that they had stopped in a secluded area to talk and smoke. Afterwards, they got intimate in Lori's car, and after a short conversation, he left without knowing what would happen next. The police conducting the interrogation were skeptical of his story because it was completely out of character for Lori. Those who knew Lori found it hard to believe that a woman who spent all her free time with her children and grandchildren could be involved with someone so much younger. Furthermore, Lori had previously escaped a toxic relationship and had sworn off her private life, promising never to date again. Even if there was some connection between her and Diego, it was hard to believe that he would leave immediately after their meeting, leaving her alone in the car in the middle of a field. The police believed that Diego's story was a lie and that he was responsible for the crime, so they continued to gather more evidence. Feeling pressured, Diego changed his story again, claiming that he had been secretly dating Lori for over a year. However, a thorough examination of their phone records revealed that this was false. They had not communicated with each other and had not called or texted, making it difficult to believe that their relationship was serious and long-lasting. In fact, it seemed that they had never even met before that tragic night. If they had really been together for a year, why had Lori not introduced him to her friends or family? And why had she asked for his ID if they already knew each other? These inconsistencies made his story seem completely unbelievable. On October 8, 2019, Diego Hernandez was arrested for first-degree murder. The news shocked the local community, as they knew Diego to be a calm and polite person who had never shown cruelty or violence. The prosecution said Diego asked Lori for a ride, and she, trusting him, agreed without questioning his true intentions. During the ride, Diego made inappropriate advances toward Lori, who refused him. In response, he attacked her, overpowering her in a secluded area where he abused and strangled her. Tests confirmed the presence of Diego's DNA under Lori's fingernails, indicating that she had fought for her life and attempted to scratch his face in self-defense. The trial of Diego Hernandez began in March 2021. Despite overwhelming evidence against him, Diego maintained his innocence, claiming he had a romantic relationship with Lori, a claim that was refuted by her children, friends, and co-workers who knew her well. After 2 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Diego Hernandez guilty of first-degree murder, citing clear evidence that the crime was premeditated. Diego then astonished everyone by admitting his guilt. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving only 35 years. He has since been incarcerated in Montana. The case of Fernando Pastorizo. A young couple in love found themselves in a toxic relationship that ended in tragedy. The investigation revealed that the situation was more complicated than it appeared, with disturbing secrets emerging. Nahir Galarza was born on September 11, 1998, in Gualeguaychú, Argentina, a city of about 100,000 residents known for its vibrant carnivals and its proximity to Uruguay. From a young age, Nahir was sociable and cheerful. She had a younger brother who was 3 years her junior. Unlike Nahir, her younger brother faced developmental challenges and struggled with learning, eventually receiving a diagnosis of a disability. Nahir excelled in school and found learning languages easy. Their family was considered exemplary and happy, maintaining a well-organized home life. Their mother emphasized cleanliness, and Nahir developed a strong obsession with order, tidiness, and the habit of washing hands regularly. Her father was a police officer, and while the parents were strict, they indulged their children. Nahir aspired to become a lawyer, and after finishing high school, enrolled in the law program at Concepción del Uruguay University. She was also passionate about sports, play field hockey, engaging in daily training and massages to stay fit, and she enjoyed a vibrant social life filled with friends and parties. In 2012, when she was 14, Nahir met 15-year-old Fernando Gabriel Pastorizo at a bowling alley. Fernando, born on January 3, 1997, in Gualeguaychú, Argentina, was a cheerful and active young man from a respectable family who loved animals. This caught Nahir's attention, and they began dating. However, their relationship was tumultuous, characterized by frequent arguments and breakups that would be resolved just a few days later. Both were jealous and suspicious, which fueled their conflicts. In 2016, they went on a family trip to Brazil, during which they managed to enjoy their time together with hardly any disputes. It seemed like their relationship was improving, but issues continued to arise, and they still had cycles of arguing, breaking up, and reconciling. On Christmas Eve 2017, both Nahir and Fernando attended a party, but they arrived separately with their friends after having fought earlier. During the party, a brawl broke out between Fernando and another guy. The exact reason for the fight remains unclear, as Nahir, Fernando, and their friends provided conflicting explanations. Fernando claimed he was severely beaten, while Nahir stated that Fernando became jealous of her and started the altercation with the guy. On December 28, 2017, Nahir went for a massage. After her session, she discovered that her phone was dead. Remembering that she had left her charger at Fernando's home, she decided to go there and stayed the night. The next morning, Fernando drove her home on his motorcycle. Unfortunately, at dawn, a taxi driver discovered Fernando bleeding and called the police and an ambulance. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Fernando had died. The police discovered that he had been attacked twice near his motorcycle. News of the incident spread quickly, and at 7 a.m., Nahir, just waking up, learned about it. She posted a picture of them together on her social media, writing, "5 years together, quarrels and breakups, reconciliations, but always with love. I love you forever, my angel." Fernando's mother called Nahir to ask what had happened, but Nahir was unsure. Meanwhile, the police began gathering evidence at the crime scene and launched a murder investigation. Initially, they thought it might be a robbery, but this theory was ruled out since Fernando's money had not been taken. The area was typically calm and safe, with a low crime rate, raising questions about who could have killed Fernando and why. Investigators discovered that Fernando had been attacked with a 9mm pistol, a type of weapon usually used by police. This raised suspicions that a police officer might be involved. It was established that Fernando was first shot from behind at close range, likely by someone who approached him unnoticed. The assailant then moved in closer and shot him in the heart. Could the attacker have been someone he knew? This possibility was reinforced by the discovery of a second helmet at the scene. The police began reviewing surveillance footage from the area and saw a girl leaving the scene at 5:22 a.m., but her face was not visible. Nahir soon became a suspect and was summoned to the police station for questioning. During the interview, she confidently claimed that Fernando had driven her home that night. She stated that she showered, went to bed, and later woke up to the news of the tragedy. She expressed her sorrow for Fernando in a social media post. Nahir appeared very distressed and was crying, leading the investigators to have no further questions for her. The police decided to interrogate Nahir's father, Marcelo Galarza, who is a police officer. He initially claimed he didn't know anyone named Fernando, but this was later proven false when photos from their trip to Brazil surfaced, showing them together. It became clear that Nahir's father was well acquainted with Fernando, leading to questions about why he lied. The police began to suspect that he might be involved in the crime, prompting his denial of knowing Fernando. They developed a theory that pointed to Marcelo's involvement, especially after discovering evidence related to a weapon. Forensic tests confirmed that this weapon belonging to Nahir's father was the weapon used to kill Fernando, making him the main suspect. Investigators considered possible motives, suspecting that he may have disliked Fernando because of his daughter's relationship with Fernando, which might have led to a confrontation that ended fatally. Then came a surprising twist. Nahir confessed to killing Fernando to protect her father, who was on the verge of being arrested. She claimed that Fernando had subjected her to physical violence, alleging that on the night of the incident, he had grabbed her hair and dragged her home, prompting her to attack him. However, questions arose about how she obtained a weapon for this act. It became evident that this was a premeditated action, as she had brought a weapon with her. Nahir had stolen her father's service pistol, which he kept in the fridge, and returned it after the murder, leaving her parents completely unaware. She was recorded on surveillance footage. When the police questioned her about why she fled and attempted to hide evidence, not contacting the police or an ambulance if she was innocent, Nahir explained that she was confused. At that moment, she didn't believe Fernando would die and didn't grasp the seriousness of the situation. Upon realizing that she had killed him, she became very distressed. Her friends and Fernando's friends provided conflicting accounts. Nahir's friends blamed Fernando, citing her frequent complaints about him, while his friends accused Nahir. Some even noted that their relationship was difficult to define, as they spent more time apart than together. Nahir had 5 other boyfriends, and Fernando likely had other girlfriends as well. Their messages were examined, revealing that Fernando appeared to be more of a victim in their relationship. Nahir was aggressive and threatened him, while the kind-hearted Fernando confided in friends about being physically abused when he tried to break up with her. He was exhausted from the relationship and sought a peaceful life without her. This may have motivated Nahir to kill him, driven by a desire for revenge over his wish to end their relationship. Later, Nahir claimed that she accidentally attacked Fernando while she was holding the weapon. She stated that they both fell off the motorcycle, and that was when the gun fired for the first time. After this, she picked up the weapon and accidentally shot him again. This explanation seemed highly unlikely. A ballistic expert stated that it was impossible for there to be 2 accidental shots. Even if the first shot was an accident, the second shot was definitely intentional. Surveillance footage showed her walking home at a normal pace, covering more than 20 blocks, which contradicted her claim of being in shock and confusion after the accidental attacking. A handwriting expert analyzed Nahir's writing and found that she displayed significant emotional instability, along with self-centered and manipulative traits. Her handwriting indicated egocentrism, a craving for attention, mood swings, impulsiveness, aggressiveness, a tendency to lie, and a desire for dominance and manipulation. Her handwriting also revealed that she was experiencing considerable emotional turmoil. Nahir was more complicated than she initially appeared. She had a contradictory, complex, pushy, and aggressive personality. It was discovered that at the age of 16, she had pulled a prank on her parents by faking her own kidnapping, leaving them terrified and shocked when they realized it was a joke. Before the trial, she underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The psychiatrist reported that she exhibited complete narcissism, was quick to anger, aggressive, and showed no remorse for her actions. Besides, she was diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, which was linked to her desire for control. During the trial, Nahir displayed defiant behavior. She arrived in shorts, looked down on others with arrogance, frequently adjusted her hair, and flirted with those around her. Although she maintained that her actions were in self-defense, nobody found her story credible. Her father initially supported her, but later distanced himself from her. There was no evidence indicating that Nahir had experienced physical abuse from Fernando. The prosecution outlined the following events. Around 2 a.m., Fernando was driving Nahir home. Upon arriving, they entered an apartment and argued for about 2 hours. Fernando wanted to end their relationship, but Nahir disagreed. During this time, she secretly took her father's weapon, and they left for another location. While traveling down a dark, deserted street, Nahir asked Fernando to stop. She got off the motorcycle, attacked him in the back, and when he fell, she attacked him again. Afterward, she returned home. Once there, she took a shower to clean off the blood and gun residue from her hands, returned her father's gun to the fridge, changed her clothes, and went to sleep. On July 3, 2018, Nahir Galarza was found guilty of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 35 years. This means she could be released when she is 54 years old. At 19, Nahir has become the youngest person in Argentina to receive a life sentence. She has filed 3 appeals against her conviction, but all have been denied, leaving the sentence unchanged. At this time, Nahir changed her statement. She claims that she is not guilty at all, and her father is the real killer, as he attacked Fernando. One interesting thing is that there is surveillance footage showing Nahir at home during the time of the murder, raising questions about her alibi. Her mother, Yamina Crow, who divorced Nahir's father, supports her daughter and believes in her innocence. Nahir has stated that she was afraid of her father and her uncle, who abused her, which led her to take the blame for the crime. She expresses concern for her mother and brother's safety. Nahir has also filed a lawsuit against her uncle. The case has attracted significant public attention, with mixed reactions from the community. Some people are indifferent, while others support Nahir and believe she is innocent. Conversely, some argue that she not only killed Fernando, but also ruined her own life. The case of Krista Waninger. On May 2, 1963, a tragic event occurred on Via Emilia in Rome when police were called to an apartment building after witnesses reported finding an injured girl. 2 police officers arrived at the apartment building and went up to the 4th floor. In the hallway between apartments 14 and 15, they discovered a blonde woman in a blue coat lying unconscious in a large pool of blood, her eyes wide with horror. Several people had gathered around her, including a shocked janitor and a young neighbor who worked at a medical center. The neighbor checked the victim's pulse, performed CPR, and did everything she could to keep the girl alive until an ambulance arrived. One of the neighbors called an ambulance, but by the time it arrived, it was too late. The girl was dead. The victim was identified as Krista Waninger, 23. She had come to Rome in search of success and fame, but tragically, she had been fatally stabbed 7 times. The police immediately began questioning neighbors and witnesses to piece together what had happened. However, no one had witnessed the attack, not even the residents of apartments 14 and 15. The police knocked on the doors of both apartments, and Gerda Hodaut came out. When asked by the police about Krista, she stated that they were friends. They had planned to meet, but Krista was attacked and stabbed just steps away from Gerda's apartment. The attack occurred at 2:50 p.m., and Gerda claimed that she had been taking a nap and had not heard anything unusual. While Krista was brutally murdered behind closed doors, it caused quite a commotion on their floor. Her explanation seemed implausible. The doorman informed the police that Krista did not live in the building. They knew each other because the victim frequently visited Gerda's apartment. The murder had occurred nearby. After investigating a few blocks away, the police went to Krista's house, which appeared to be quite empty. Meanwhile, Gerda was taken to the police station for questioning while the authorities carefully examined the crime scene. Under the doorknob of Gerda's apartment, the police discovered a bloody handprint, indicating that Krista had tried to call for help. The building's doorman recalled that when he heard a woman scream, he quickly ran up the stairs. On his way, he encountered a strange man coming down who seemed startled to see him. At first, the doorman did not pay much attention to the strange man. However, he later suspected that there was a connection between this man and the case. When the doorman arrived at the scene, several residents from nearby apartments had gathered. They found Krista lying in a large pool of blood, her breathing irregular and her condition deteriorating. The witnesses were all in a state of panic and did not know how to help. Gerda, who was present at the police station, was willing to share any information she had about her friend Krista. She seemed genuinely concerned about the attack and did not understand why anyone would want to harm Krista. They had been friends for a long time, supporting each other in their modeling and acting careers. Gerda said that Krista was supposed to arrive at around 3 p.m., but she had been feeling unwell that day and had taken sleeping pills, which caused her to miss the attack. Although Gerda spoke about her sleep problems, she could not remember the name of the pills she had taken or explain why she had not canceled her meeting with Krista despite having gone to bed. The police found Gerda's story suspicious. Krista had suffered serious injuries, including 7 stab wounds, 3 of which were in the chest. The attacker had used a large knife to assault Krista, leaving her unable to be saved. In addition, Krista had several defensive wounds on her arms. The forensic expert observed that all of the wounds appeared to have been inflicted from above, indicating that the attacker was tall. In interviews with witnesses, it was confirmed that a man, described as unknown, had fled the scene shortly before the police arrived. Several people, including the concierge, reported seeing a tall man in a blue jacket leaving the building shortly after the attack. Using the descriptions of the witnesses, a composite sketch was created and subsequently published in newspapers and broadcast on television. The police reconstructed the timeline of events, determining that Krista left her apartment at approximately 2 p.m. and planned to return at 5 p.m. Before the appointment, she had visited a friend. About 30 minutes later, she arrived at Gerda's house, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and was attacked on the stairs. It is believed that the attacker knew Krista and was waiting for her. Police initially suspected her friend Gerda because of her strange behavior during the attack. A neighbor reported that she had called Gerda's apartment and heard someone moving around behind the door, but no one answered, perhaps out of fear. The police suspected that Gerda was withholding information. Gerda insisted that no one rang the doorbell until the police arrived and claimed that she had heard nothing until the police knocked. Krista's murder in broad daylight in central Rome caused a media frenzy. The police hoped to gather useful information from the public, but the widespread attention also led to rumors spreading rapidly. The police received dozens of statements, most of which were complex, while others simply restated what was already known. They investigated all known criminals with a history of knife attacks, focusing not only on those who might be hiding in Rome, but also checking neighboring cities, although this effort was fruitless. In the midst of these events, a wave of panic spread throughout the community. People became increasingly afraid to go out, and the police station was flooded with angry calls from locals urging them to arrest the person responsible for Krista's attack. Some callers even made threats to the police, demanding action to ensure the safety of the streets. Meanwhile, Gerda maintained her innocence, calling the police's suspicion of her an insult. The police began to explore other leads, focusing especially on those close to Krista. There were many indications that the perpetrator was connected to Krista, leading the police to believe that the attack may have been motivated by jealousy or personal animosity. Therefore, they looked into the relationships Krista had formed since moving to another country. One notable individual was Krista's boyfriend. He was very jealous and possessive, with evidence suggesting that he had abused Krista on several occasions. Their relationship was tumultuous, often triggered by his unfounded suspicions that Krista was cheating on him with other men. This jealousy may have stemmed from several factors, including Krista's notebook filled with the phone numbers of men in the modeling and acting industries. Her profession required her to socialize and network with many people, and Krista frequently attended social events to promote herself and build valuable relationships, which made her boyfriend feel uncomfortable. He became jealous of every random person she interacted with, and his insecurities led him to become increasingly controlling. Every phone call from a man was viewed as a betrayal, which angered her boyfriend. This pressure caused Krista to decline movie offers and made her financially dependent on him. The police identified 2 suspects: Krista's boyfriend, who had both a motive and a violent streak, and her friend Gerda Hodap, who was near the scene of the murder but claimed not to have seen or heard anything. It is possible that Gerda had a motive for the murder, perhaps wanting to eliminate an attractive rival. However, there is no evidence to support this theory. Journalists constantly intervened, probing for information and asking difficult questions. The police were puzzled by the presence of a strange man in a blue jacket. Although this man appeared at the crime scene and quickly left, he coldly mentioned that there was a woman screaming on the 4th floor, without offering any help. Other witnesses grew suspicious and tried to explain the presence of this stranger. The police concluded that the case might have been carefully planned, with the man in the blue jacket acting as a distraction. However, if that were the case, the criminal would have likely stayed at the crime scene, which raised suspicions about Gerda. Meanwhile, Gerda faced constant interrogations and became a media phenomenon. Journalists pursued her, spreading rumors and portraying her as a monster. The police believed that if Gerda was not involved in the murder, she may have acted as an informant or concealed information. However, to date, there has been no concrete evidence linking her to the case. The police continue to investigate the possibility of a random attack. However, they face a shortage of resources. A search of Krista's inner circle yielded no leads. Her address book contained many phone numbers related to men and various clubs in Rome, as well as organizations connected to modeling and acting. Hundreds of contacts had accumulated over the years. Despite a thorough police investigation, each contact led to a dead end. Gerda remained under close police surveillance. They even took her to the morgue to view Krista's body and observe her reaction. The police noted her emotionless response to their questions. The interrogations were repeated several times. Gerda changed her story, claiming that the doorbell rang when Krista visited. However, the screams that followed frightened her, so she did not open the door. Gerda explained her dishonesty by saying that she felt ashamed for not helping her friend. The police believed that she was a potential accomplice to the crime, suggesting that Krista had been lured there so that her attacker could kill her. Ultimately, the police were unable to obtain a confession that would identify Gerda as the killer, and at most, she could be considered an accomplice. By reconstructing the timeline of events, the police discovered why the janitor had not noticed a strange man entering the building. He had visited the utility room several times during the day. It was a complete coincidence that he had entered just before Krista arrived at the apartment complex. This raised suspicions that the attacker knew exactly when and where Krista would arrive. Several witnesses reported seeing Krista enter the apartment complex alone, unescorted, and without anyone else accompanying her. This led the police to believe that the perpetrator had entered the apartment complex before Krista, just before she arrived. It was suspected that the perpetrator knew which floor she would go to and where to wait for her. After a while, the Krista Waninger murder case yielded no more clues. Public interest in the case also waned, as no similar attacks occurred afterward. People began to calm down, and Krista's case gradually faded into oblivion, largely because her family lived far away in another country. Despite efforts to understand the situation, it was difficult to generate significant interest in the case. Krista's mother and sister actively distributed flyers with her picture in the hope of attracting potential witnesses, but their efforts did not advance the investigation. The investigation into Krista's murder had stalled for 10 months until an anonymous witness contacted a local newspaper. Using a false name, he asked to speak to the editor. The man claimed to be the brother of Krista's killer and offered to sell information to the newspaper for a large sum of money. The journalist who took the call felt that the man's story was more than just a scam to capitalize on the tragedy. Believing that the witness might have accurate information, he decided to contact the police. The journalist carefully communicated with the man, promising to collect the necessary funds to pay him in advance by the evening. They agreed to contact him later to discuss the details. After the call, the journalist went to the police station to report the unusual conversation. The police showed interest in the case, and the journalist agreed to work with them, using special equipment to monitor the incoming call. The anonymous caller contacted the journalist at 19:05. During this call, two police officers listened in and recorded the conversation. They were able to locate the source of the call. Several police officers then went to the address provided, where they found a 32-year-old man using the phone booth. His name was Guido Pieri. When they saw him, the police immediately recognized that he matched the police sketch of the suspect. He was arrested and searched, and their suspicions were confirmed when they found a 30-centimeter-long knife in his jacket pocket. Similar to the weapon used in the attack on Krista, the police believed they had the right suspect. Unfortunately, further examination revealed that Krista was not killed with this knife. Guido Pieri insisted from the beginning that he was only trying to profit from the story, but he was unable to provide any clear information. When the police searched his home, they found another knife, but no blood, and it could not be linked to Krista's wounds. Disturbing notes were found in Guido's home, including 5 notebooks detailing gruesome murders of women. The most alarming was the final story, which was very similar to the case of Krista Waninger. The story included specific details that had not been made public and were known only to the perpetrator, raising suspicions against Guido. Guido Pieri grew up in a family with 4 brothers and 3 sisters. From an early age, he had a strong passion for adventure painting. However, while in vocational school, he decided to drop out and start working, especially after struggling to finish 8th grade 3 times. Although he was not unintelligent, he had obvious problems with self-control. By the age of 18, he was employed as a mechanic in a construction company, maintaining a fleet of equipment. After 10 years, Guido married a much older woman. During this time, he pursued his passion for painting, dreaming of becoming an artist. In February, Guido moved to Paris to pursue this dream, but unfortunately, his efforts ended in disappointment. In his diary, he explained his feelings in detail. It was clear that Guido was a deeply creative individual with a unique perspective on life, but he struggled to manage the challenges he faced and find his own path. He lacked the courage and motivation needed to overcome these obstacles. As a result, Guido moved back to Rome, ended his marriage, and took a job as a secretary at the Institute, where he worked until he was 63. His diaries reveal a disillusioned man full of ambitions and ideas that he was unable to turn into reality. When the police questioned him about the notes they discovered during the search, Guido explained that they were ideas for a future novel, as he longed to write a book. When reviewing the notes, the police noticed many similarities to the real-life case of Krista Waninger. Details of the crime scene and descriptions of the people involved closely resembled the apartment building and surrounding area where Krista was murdered. This raised questions about whether these accounts referred to her murder, which aroused suspicions among the police. Guido led a seemingly normal life, frequenting upscale restaurants and bars. However, he remained on the police radar, having been spotted at several other violent crime scenes unrelated to Krista. Unfortunately, he did not confess or provide any evidence of his innocence. At that time, witnesses who had seen a suspicious man in a blue jacket leaving the apartment building after hearing Krista scream had not yet testified. 3 of the 4 witnesses identified him as Guido. Despite ongoing questioning and suspicion, no physical evidence was found linking him to the crime. The police decided to return all the confiscated diaries belonging to Guido, and he was released. During this time, Krista's sister pushed for the investigation to be reopened. The police reviewed all relevant information, but this lead did not yield any results. Guido remained the prime suspect, but he did not confess. Despite having no evidence to present, the police continued to investigate and put pressure on him. Surprisingly, Guido Pieri went to the police station and confessed to killing Krista Waninger. He was arrested, and it took a year before the trial began. Despite his confession, He was acquitted due to a lack of sufficient evidence. His lawyer argued that Guido had mental health problems and pointed out that he refused to confess again. By this time, he had been officially diagnosed with schizophrenia, which led the police to consider his confession unreliable. There were 2 more hearings. In both trials, Guido Pieri was found guilty, but he was released on bail due to his mental condition. Guido later changed his story, claiming that he had been at the scene of the murder by accident and denied any guilt. In addition, Guido destroyed his own notebooks, containing disturbing notes that could have been used against him. During the psychiatric evaluation, he was found to be insane. Therefore, the court could only order Guido to undergo treatment for schizophrenia. Despite his crime, he was allowed to go free without any apparent motive. For a long time, he was considered a threat to society, but there was not enough evidence to prove it. He was eventually released and deemed harmless, much to the shock of Krista's family. Sadly, Krista's relatives were never able to obtain justice or see Guido incarcerated.
The case of Licia Mitchell Jackson. In 1979, the Jackson family lived in Conroe. They chose to build their lives there and were respected by the community as a hard-working and loving couple. Over time, they had 3 children, with Licia Mitchell Jackson being the youngest. Despite the high crime rate in the area, the Jackson family felt safe and content with their peaceful life. Licia was intelligent and well-read, spending her time with books. She did well in school, prioritizing her studies as she wanted to go to college, obtain a solid education, and build a career. Licia spent most of her time with her 2 older brothers, and despite the age gap, they had a close relationship and enjoyed spending time together. When her brothers turned 16 and 18, Licia was only 12, which made her feel safe around them. On September 7, 1979, the weather was warm, perfect for a day at the lake. The brothers had not originally planned to take Licia with them, but she asked to come along at the last minute. Their cousin, who was 20 at the time, also joined them. The parents allowed the 4 of them to go to the lake, a popular activity in the area where locals often fish or gather by the water. They prepared and headed to the lake in the afternoon, arriving around 4 p.m. They spent some time relaxing, swimming, and sunbathing, planning to leave at 7 p.m. to prepare for the next day. Since it was Licia's first time there, she wanted to explore the area more. She decided not to swim and just wanted to walk. However, none of the brothers wanted to go with her, so they let her go by herself. Most of the way to the parking lot, where Licia's brothers were waiting, was visible. When Licia was out of sight, the others continued to prepare to leave, unaware that she had disappeared. These were usually peaceful areas where attacks and murders were rare, so the 12-year-old girl did not feel afraid. After about half an hour, when Licia still had not appeared, her brothers began to worry. They rushed to find her, first using their phones to call their sister, other family members, and the police. The older brother went to a nearby gas station, which had the only phone in the area, to report Licia's disappearance to their parents. Meanwhile, the rest of the group intensified their search. Their concern attracted the attention of other vacationers, and some local boys and girls joined in to help. They searched the area, calling for Licia, but found nothing. Some even began diving into the shallow part of the lake, thinking she might have swum alone and drowned. On the other side of the lake, where Licia had gone, was a steep cliff. Some people speculated that she might have tried to dive in but failed. However, Licia was not the adventurous type and would not have made such a choice. In addition, without her brother following her, the underwater search would have been fruitless. After a while, Licia's parents arrived at the scene with the police. Some volunteers also came to help search the lake area, and a few policemen spoke to her brother, who had lost track of her. The police's initial hypothesis was that she had accidentally drowned, and they based this on the presence of the cliff. They first focused their search on the lakeshore and the quieter areas of the lake, thinking that she might have decided to swim while walking and had come to a part of the lake where swimming was not allowed. There were dangerous undercurrents that could have caused her legs to cramp, leading to drowning. Searching the area yielded no results. The police believed that the unpredictable undercurrent could have pulled an inexperienced swimmer under. They hypothesized that Licia might have fallen victim to such a current, which could have caused her body to sink and not resurface. Licia's brother insisted that she had been wearing casual clothes, not a swimsuit, and that she was a good girl who would never have gone underwater dressed like that. Unfortunately, it seemed that no one listened to him, as the focus remained on the accidental drowning theory. After hours of fruitless searching, the group considered calling in divers to examine the water further. Suddenly, one of the searchers discovered small, broken glasses that clearly belonged to a child. When shown to other children, they confirmed that Licia had been wearing the same type of glasses. The most alarming detail was the faint bloodstains on the glasses. It was suspected that these glasses had been found on a road leading away from the lake, especially since no trace of Licia was found in the water. This led the police to shift their focus from drowning to kidnapping, increasing their attention to the land around the lake. Near where the glasses were found, the police also discovered an earring that belonged to Licia. Her parents confirmed that it was hers. Another witness informed the police that he had seen a brown Chevrolet Monte Carlo driven by a reckless driver who was behaving erratically. The driver suddenly changed lanes and skidded on the road, appearing to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs. This behavior raised suspicion, prompting the police to investigate young people driving similar vehicles that matched the witness's description. However, there were many such cars in the area, as this model was quite common. In addition, no one could clearly remember the driver's face or license plate number, leaving the police without any solid clues. They checked the road service reports in the hope that the reckless driver had been involved in an accident, but found nothing. Licia's brothers felt guilty for not looking after their sister, and all the family members wanted to know what had happened to Licia. Licia's parents hoped that they would receive a call from the kidnapper demanding a ransom. However, the phone remained silent, and no letters arrived in the first 24 hours after she went missing. Initially, Licia's family hoped that she would return home safely, but as time went on, that chance began to diminish rapidly. The situation worsened on September 13, 6 days after Licia's disappearance. Early that morning, a worker was preparing to go to the oil facility where he had worked for many years when his supervisor received a call. He was directed to a remote area to inspect and repair a pipeline, which happened to be near the lake where the Jackson family had vacationed a week earlier. Upon arriving and inspecting the pipeline, the worker immediately smelled a very strong and unpleasant odor. Although the smell was not unusual for him, as the facility was located in a wilderness area where animals sometimes got into the pipeline and died, he was accustomed to dealing with such situations. Cleaning up dead animals was part of his daily routine. After completing the repair, he decided to investigate the source of the stench. A few meters from the pipeline, he discovered the body of a small child. He quickly notified his superiors, who called the police. When they reported the discovery of a child's body, the police immediately thought of the missing girl, Licia, for whom they had been actively searching in the area. The state of the body made immediate identification impossible. It was so decomposed that even determining the gender was difficult. They would need to conduct an examination and check dental records to confirm that the body was indeed Licia, marking the end of the search for the girl. This also began the hunt for the person responsible for the crime. During the investigation at the site where the body was discovered, the police found Licia's clothes. They concluded that the girl's body had been brought to the location after the crime had occurred and that the attack had not taken place there. The perpetrator appeared to have been careless with the evidence, leaving it behind. It is likely that the suspect was a local resident familiar with the area. The condition of the body complicated the investigation. Experts determined that the girl had been abused and then strangled, but the exact circumstances of the crime could not be established. During an examination of her clothing, small biological traces were found on her shorts, which could potentially identify the perpetrator. Unfortunately, in 1979, forensic technology was not advanced enough to analyze these traces, but the police wisely chose to preserve them for future analysis. Licia's death caused panic and tension in the community. The city, known for its low crime rate, had not experienced a murder in many years. The brutal murder of a 12-year-old girl in broad daylight, especially in a relatively densely populated area, left the community in a state of shock. People no longer felt safe, and the police station was overwhelmed with calls from locals asking for increased security and a swift arrest of the perpetrator. Unfortunately, this was not an easy task. The police followed many leads regarding the suspect, but all of them came to a dead end. Additionally, almost everyone who was present at the lake on that tragic day was investigated. Special focus was placed on the owners of brown cars. These checks lasted for months, but yielded no results. The police also investigated known abusers who were in the area at the time, but these efforts also proved fruitless. Years passed, but Licia's family still could not learn the truth about what happened to her. As the 1990s and 2000s progressed, Licia's relatives came to terms with their situation, losing hope of discovering what had happened to Licia. They admitted that they even forgave the person responsible. However, in 2020, new forensic techniques began to emerge from advances in the United States. Beginning in 2005, investigations into long unsolved crimes were launched. Police formed teams to re-examine old evidence with fresh perspectives. This renewed effort brought hope for answers to questions that had haunted the community for decades. Police recovered Licia's clothing, which contained small traces that could potentially be linked to a suspect. A thorough analysis was conducted, but unfortunately, the technology of the time was not sufficient to extract meaningful data from those small traces. This left Licia's family feeling hopeless once again. Licia's family and friends, who have long sought answers about her fate, are facing another wave of painful disappointment. However, in 2021, a significant technological advance emerged. New methods and equipment were developed that can collect and analyze microscopic traces. A key feature of this technology is the ability to completely recreate DNA samples from even the smallest remnants found on the victim's belongings and clothing. This advance has the potential to transform the investigation, as evidence collected in the 1970s could finally become significant. A team of experts was formed to re-examine the evidence using these advanced techniques. Concerns arose again about the number of traces available. If they were too few, they would have to wait for further technological advances. Fortunately, the new method successfully extracted DNA from Licia's clothing for the first time. However, reconstructing her genetic profile required a significant amount of time and analysis. The investigation began in April 2021 and continued until October 2022, when the police finally had a complete profile of the criminal. By that time, 43 years had passed since Licia's tragic death. The next step was to find the killer and ensure he was punished for his crimes. The police decided to cross-reference the profile with several databases, including KOS and those used by the FBI. This approach had been tried before, but the incomplete genetic profile made it difficult to narrow down potential suspects and find a reliable match. In April 2022, the police reassessed the information. After 43 years of investigation, they identified the killer as Gerald Dwight Casey. Police tracked down his last known address, hoping to confront this dangerous criminal. Unfortunately, they discovered that Gerald had died at the age of 47. 20 years before this investigation began. The police decided to take a closer look at his background. They discovered that Gerald's activities did not end with the murder of Licia. He committed another brutal crime in 1989, exactly 10 years later. After killing Licia, he moved to a nearby town, about a half-hour's drive from the lake, hoping to remain under the radar until the situation calmed down. Starting on November 20th, Gerald moved to another city with his girlfriend. Gerald had a troubled past, faced serious legal problems, and struggled with drug and alcohol addiction. Those who knew him considered him dangerous and unpredictable. He was a robber and had committed a series of petty thefts. At that time, Gerald was engaged to Carla Smith, 36, who also had a history of theft, legal trouble, and substance abuse. She had developed a reputation for reckless behavior. On one occasion, she was arrested for drunk driving, causing several accidents in which no one was injured. This incident led to a police chase, but she ultimately chose to stop. The young couple was planning to move to New York to start a new life and hoped to become wealthy. However, they did not have the resources necessary for such a dramatic change. With their experience in robbery, Gerald and Carla knew how to handle their situation. In the city, there was a couple named Sonia Lynn Howell and Daryl Pennington, who were known for their business success and financial stability. They knew about Daryl and Sonia, a wealthy couple, and decided to visit their house to assess the possibility of a robbery. After observing the house for a while, they noticed that Daryl and Sonia often went away together, probably for work, which would give them more opportunities to carry out their plan. After reviewing the information, the robbers planned and chose the time to break into the house. Their goal was to sell the stolen items at a pawn shop to raise money for their trip to New York. Unfortunately, their plan began to fall apart immediately. Once inside, Gerald and Carla found Sonia at home. Realizing the danger, she tried to call the police, but Carla stopped her by pointing a gun at her head and shooting her while she was dialing. Gerald then pulled out a gun and fired 9 shots at Sonia, leaving her with no chance of survival. The loud gunshots attracted the attention of the neighbors, who quickly reported the incident to the police. In their haste, the robbers took everything of value they found in the house, including money, jewelry, a Rolex watch, guns, and other equipment, before fleeing the scene. Carla searched Sonia and took valuables from her pockets. During this time, they discovered 2 strangers inside the victim's house. When the police arrived, the couple had already escaped. Unfortunately, no one was able to identify the car or the faces of the criminals because they were wearing masks. The police began to search for them, but the experienced robbers had carefully planned their escape route and fled by car without being detected. Later, an abandoned car matching the description given by witnesses was found on the outskirts of the city. It seemed like a perfect case again, but this time, greed got the better of them. They were too impatient and rushed to New York, which led to a number of mistakes. The biggest mistake they made was to immediately go to a pawn shop and sell all the stolen goods there. The pawnbroker did not display the goods and instead contacted the police. The pawnbroker remembered the thieves, returned the stolen goods, and provided footage from his surveillance camera. The police recognized several familiar faces and later located and arrested Gerald and Carla on the highway. The couple was headed to New York, but their trip was abruptly stopped at a checkpoint. They did not resist arrest, although the police were prepared to use force if necessary. While they denied killing Sonia, the evidence at the crime scene was clear bloody fingerprints and their hair were found. Carla accepted a plea deal with the prosecution in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her lawyer considered this a favorable deal because the couple faced the possibility of the death penalty. As a result, she testified against her boyfriend Gerald, leading to his conviction for Sonia's murder and several other crimes. Gerald was sentenced to death, while Carla received a reduced sentence of 10 years in prison for her involvement in the incident. After serving 10 years, Carla was released, and has not had any legal problems since. Gerald, on the other hand, remained incarcerated while awaiting execution. After several appeals, he was finally given a lethal injection on April 18, 2002, at the age of 47. Gerald's attorney made significant efforts to have his sentence commuted to life in prison to save his life, but all efforts were unsuccessful. Throughout his life, up until his execution, Gerald never admitted to killing Sonia and did not mention the murder of Lesia Mitchell Jackson. The evidence against him for Lesia's murder was clear and convincing. It is suspected that Gerald may have been involved in more murders in Texas in the 1970s and 1980s. However, thorough investigations using various databases have found no genetic matches between him and evidence from other unsolved cases. This does not mean that he limited himself to just 2 violent incidents. At a time when forensic science was just beginning to advance and the understanding of genetics was limited, it is likely that some of his other victims have not yet been discovered. There may still be unsolved cases in the archives. Lesia's family was relieved to know that her killer had been brought to justice, but this did not bring them much comfort. Lesia's mother struggled for a long time to come to terms with her daughter's murder. She made it clear that she did not blame her sons for not keeping an eye on their sister, although the brothers still carry a sense of guilt. A few years after the tragedy, the Lesia family moved away from Texas in search of a place where they would not be reminded of their past.
The case of Ida Burley Lozano. Ida Burley Lozano was the son of Tatiana Ferreira Lozano Pereira. After divorcing Ida Burley's father, Tatiana got married to Alex Pereira. Together, Tatiana and Alex had another child. People who knew the family described them as quiet and unproblematic. Tatiana worked as a manager at a local supermarket, and her eldest son, Ita Burley, lived with her. He was considered a polite and well-behaved boy who enjoyed spending his free time listening to music with his friends. The situation worsened when, at the age of 14, Ita Burley confided to his mother that he was different from other boys and was not attracted to girls. From that moment on, his mother often ridiculed him, and their arguments became increasingly frequent. By the end of 2016, their relationship had deteriorated significantly, and Tatiana began physically abusing her son. The day after Christmas, Ita Burley shared several posts on Facebook describing his difficult home life. He included a photo of himself with his mother, stepfather, and younger brother. In the post, he wrote mainly about his family. He also shared other photos showing bloody cuts and scrapes on his face, back, chest, and arms. In the comments, Ita Burley revealed that his mother had beaten him and kicked him out of the house because he was different from other children. In the post, Ita Burley mentioned that he was staying with a friend because his mother had ordered the children in their neighborhood to attack him. A few days later, he returned to his mother's house, but the arguments continued. One day, his mother beat him again, forcing him to run away. This time, he went to his grandmother's house, where he finally found safety. His paternal family welcomed and accepted him. His mother, Tatiana, called him several times, urging him to return home before December 29, claiming that she wanted to make up with him before New Year's Eve. However, his uncle, Dario Rosa, and other family members did not agree to let Ita Burley return to his mother. They doubted Tatiana's sincerity and suspected that she might endanger the boy. Despite their warnings, Ita Burley was happy that his mother seemed willing to mend their relationship. Hoping to improve things with her, he left his grandmother's house, unaware that a trap awaited him. Tatiana had devised a cruel plan to teach her son a lesson. She hired 2 young men, Victor Roberto da Silva and Miller da Silva Barisa, to attack him. When Ita Burley arrived home, Victor and Miller entered the room while Tatiana was present and attacked him. Ita Burley screamed for help, pleading with his mother, but she stood by, unmoved, until he collapsed. Tatiana's plan did not end there. When she found her son unconscious, she instructed the young men to kill him. but they refused. Determined to resolve what she saw as her son's unconventional tendencies, Tatiana went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and attacked him. Victor and Miller, horrified by what they witnessed, fled the house. Tatiana then went into the bedroom, where her husband was sleeping, and woke him up to help her dispose of the body. Together, they wrapped the body in a blanket, put it in the car, and drove to a remote, sparsely populated area with thick reeds along the road. There, they abandoned the body and returned home to clean up the scene. The next day, the couple returned to the location, doused the body with gasoline, and burned it to prevent identification. From that day on, Itaberli's paternal relatives could no longer contact him. As time passed, his grandmother became increasingly worried. He did not call to update her on his reconciliation with his mother. She had expected him to join her for the New Year celebrations, as they had planned to celebrate together. With no news from Itaberli, she asked his uncle to take her to Tatiana's house to inquire about Itaberli. When they arrived at Tatiana's house, they found her calm. She explained that her son was not home because he had gone to a friend's house, and she had no further information about him. His grandmother was unsure whether to believe Tatiana or call the police. However, after several hours of being unable to contact her grandson, she decided to get the police involved. Itaberli's grandmother believed that her grandson would not disappear without informing her, especially since they had planned to spend the holidays together. She was convinced that something serious had happened and felt an investigation was necessary. She shared all her suspicions with the police. Itaberli's uncle Dario mentioned the strained relationship between Tatiana and her son. Furthermore, when questioned, Tatiana appeared surprisingly calm about the situation. Her lack of concern and failure to report her son missing raised suspicions. The police began an investigation, focusing primarily on Tatiana. A few days later, on January 7, 2017, a patrol discovered the burned body of a young man wrapped up and left in a rural area of São Paulo. The body had deep stab wounds, and an intact bracelet was found nearby. Police suspected the body was that of Itaberli, who had recently been reported missing. They notified the boy's grandmother, who identified the bracelet as her grandson's. However, this alone was not sufficient to confirm the identity of the body. Investigators requested the Institute of Forensic Medicine to conduct a DNA test using genetic material from the boy's mother. Forensic experts determined that the victim had died approximately 10 days earlier. Police also concluded that the location where the body was discovered was not the crime scene, as no evidence was found there. On January 11, police searched Tatiana's home and discovered bloodstains on the sofa, bed, and walls. They also found 2 kitchen knives with bloodstains, suspected to be the murder weapons. Tatiana and her husband Alex were arrested. Confronted with the evidence and unable to deny it, Tatiana confessed to killing her eldest son, but provided a completely different version of events. She claimed that on the day she intended to reconcile with Itaberli, he came home drunk and aggressive. According to Tatiana, he attacked her, her husband, and their 4-year-old son. Tatiana alleged that she and her husband acted in self-defense, killing their son because they believed he was a threat to their family. Out of fear, they disposed of the boy's body. However, the police did not believe this testimony. Contradictions in Tatiana's and Alex's accounts revealed that both were lying. Statements from relatives about Itaberli starkly contrasted with those of his mother. Tatiana described her son as problematic, accusing him of using illegal drugs, drinking excessively, avoiding work, and being disliked by the community. However, neighbors and acquaintances who knew Itaberli and his paternal family described him as responsible, kind, considerate, polite, and well-liked. He also maintained a close circle of friends and avoided alcohol or drugs. The police gathered additional evidence linking Tatiana and Alex to Itaberli's murder. A key piece of evidence was an attempt to delete a Facebook post written by Itaberli, in which he mentioned being attacked. Fortunately, some of his friends had saved the post and turned it over to the police. Suddenly, Tatiana changed her story, adding 3 more people to the case: Victor, Miller, and a girl who acted as an intermediary for their communication. In this new version, Tatiana claimed that she had asked the young men to teach her son a lesson because he had threatened and attacked her. However, she alleged that the young men had killed her son without her consent while she was outside the house. She said she heard her son screaming for help, but when she returned, she discovered that the killers had fled. She then woke her husband, and together they disposed of the body. The defense argued that Tatiana had acted out of anger and self-defense, claiming that Itaberli had been aggressive and had previously attacked his mother. However, significant inconsistencies in Tatiana's story cast doubt on her claims. On January 13, the police arrested Victor, Miller, and the girl who had acted as an intermediary between Tatiana and the 2 men. The girl was also a witness to the crime. The testimonies of these young people differed significantly from Tatiana's version of events. According to the girl, Tatiana had confided in her several times that she was extremely angry with her son, whom she described as different from other boys. Tatiana expressed a desire to find someone to beat her son. The girl suggested her boyfriend and his friend, who were willing to do the job for a fee. Tatiana immediately hired them. The girl stated that after Victor and Miller left the house, Tatiana killed Itaberli. She claimed to have witnessed this with her own eyes, seeing Tatiana take a knife and stab her son to death. Victor and Miller shared their version of events. Their testimonies were consistent and the police believed them. They stated that they did not receive any money from Tatiana and confirmed that they were not present at the murder, as they had already left the house by that time. After gathering all the evidence, on February 9, 2017, the prosecutor's office transferred the case to court on charges of murder. Tatiana and Alex were also charged with concealing a corpse. The couple's lawyer argued that Tatiana had acted in self-defense and that Alex had been asleep during the incident. However, the prosecutor contended that the crime was motivated by Tatiana's inability to accept her son's non-traditional tendencies. The court decided to detain Tatiana, Alex, Miller, and Victor. During the criminal proceedings, Tatiana remained in custody, while Alex and the 2 young men were transferred to the Santa Rosa jail. Following the court's decision to impose detention orders on all the defendants, Tatiana's defense lawyer resigned. A new attorney was appointed to represent her. The new attorney argued that Itaberli had been a problematic child who had previously threatened to harm other family members. The attorney also claimed that Itaberli's aunt had filed 2 complaints against him. However, the county police reported that no such complaints had been filed. The murder, as reported by the media, deeply shocked the community. Itaberli's Facebook page quickly turned into a memorial site, filled with messages of grief and demands for justice. A few days later, the police conducted a reenactment of the crime, during which only Tatiana was present. During the reenactment, Tatiana was temporarily taken back to her home. She recounted the events of that day in detail, explaining how she had taken her son's life and identifying the location where she and her husband had dumped and burned the body. People gathered at the crime scene. Some accused Tatiana of being a heartless and cruel mother, while others came to her defense. Among those defending Tatiana was her mother, Itaberli's grandmother. She asserting that Tatiana had acted in self-defense against her son, whom she described as disobedient and difficult to manage. The police no longer believed these claims, and the number of those opposing Tatiana grew significantly. 7 months after the murder, Itaberli's body was finally returned to the family for a Christian burial during a 2-hour funeral service. Friends of Itaberli gathered at the city cemetery to bid him farewell. Throughout the months of investigation, the police collected numerous statements from the family's neighbors. They confirmed that there were issues within the family, which escalated after Itaberli revealed to his mother that he was different from other boys and that he did not like girls. Many neighbors reported frequent quarrels and incidents of domestic violence. They also claimed that Tatiana often bullied her son, even after he returned home bruised from being beaten by other children. On November 27, 2019, a jury convicted Tatiana Ferreira Lozano Pereira of murder, sentencing her to 25 years and 9 months in prison. Victor Roberto da Silva and Miller da Silva Barisa were each sentenced to 21 years and 8 months in prison for their involvement in the brutal beating and indirect role in causing the death of Itaberli. As for Tatiana's husband, Alex, his trial was postponed. Relatives of Itaberli expressed relief, believing that justice had been served.